Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 961. Born from Ash. The tender cry Northern heard from within the complex. What began as a soft whimper but soon swelled. Only added weight to the sadness pressing on his chest. Right now, all he wanted was to launch himself into the air and vanish into the sky. But Byron's words echoed relentlessly in his mind. Paragon Rizel. He was the one man in both this world and the one before who had truly become a mentor to him. Maybe it was because he was older, or maybe it was because he was special in ways few men ever were. Rizel had a kindness that resonated, not just on the surface, but in the depths of Northern's soul. He was the kind of man Northern wouldn't have minded becoming. A force of nature, a powerhouse who could live with the weight of his choices. A man for whom dozens of rifts had to be torn open, who needed to be trapped and smothered with behemoths just to make him bleed, let alone die. Burning Storm never would have fallen if he hadn't fought in Lithia. And even then, he had fought alone, long before Northern arrived. He was a formidable man, a legend, and a marvel. It broke Northern to be here, to be standing in the wake of it all, hearing the cries of his newborn. His heart clenched, lungs tight as if cords had wrapped around them. But no tears came. He wished they would. He begged silently for them to fall, but his eyes stayed dry, arid as the dunes of Devon. His face, a mask without expression. With a long breath, he gently lifted the body, his movements quiet and deliberate, then slowly ascended. He hovered toward the edge of the ruined balcony, landing with a soft thud as his boots met the fractured ground. Glass crunched beneath his soles, shards crushed effortlessly under the weight of his steps. He entered the chamber. Silence blanketed the room. All heads turned as Northern walked in, carrying someone in his arms. Leary, her face drawn and pale, rested against a nest of plush bedding. She leaned up slowly, eyes weary, spirit heavier. For old men gathered around her, pausing at once as they caught sight of Northern. Only the cry of the indifferent baby broke the silence. A soft, careless song against the stillness. Northern cast a glance at the shattered table nearby. Then, gently, he laid Burning Storm down on it. His movements carried reverence, like a priest tending to a relic. He stepped back, turned to face his wife and bowed deeply, his torso folding into a perfect 90-degree arc. He hesitated, teeth clenched so tight they could have cracked stone. His sorrow didn't rise in sobs, didn't pour from his eyes, but it pulsed in every breath, every tremor in his shoulders, every tightened muscle in his face. I couldn't protect him. His voice broke, as did something inside him. Northern bit down again, jaw rigid, as if trying to cage the grief clawing through his chest. He remained bowed, still and silent, waiting for a response. Despite the exhaustion etched into her features, Leary rose slowly, one hand cradling the wailing infant. The elders around her exchanged uneasy glances, concern flashing across their aged faces, but none moved to stop her. Veiled Light knelt nearby, unmoving. He had been the one to deliver the child, and so remained there, head low, trembling. His eyes, wide, unblinking, were locked onto the lifeless body resting on the table. His shoulders quivered as if holding back something too vast for words. Leary stepped forward. Each motion was laced with visible pain, her limbs sluggish yet unwavering. She stopped before Northern, who still held his bow with reverence. Then, with a shaking hand, she reached forward and pulled back the fabric. The trembling in her fingers deepened. As the scorched remnants of her husband's body were revealed, her own frame jolted, like a tree struck by sudden frost. Her knees buckled slightly. The weight of grief almost dropped her to the floor, yet she held fast, even with her child in her arms. The room had changed. The elders had all risen now, save for veiled light. Their expressions were grim, lined with grief, regret, and a quiet, helpless fury. Leary slowly shifted her gaze down to Northern. Her voice emerged, soft and trembling, yet resolute, a delicate blade sheathed in sorrow. "And you are?" Northern hesitated, the breath in his lungs catching for just a moment. "His disciple."
We met in Lydia.
"We came here together, but I was weakened after our last battle there. I couldn't." "You don't need to explain yourself to me, boy." Her voice, though soft, cut through the air like silk over steel. Calm, compassionate, certain. Northern stopped speaking, jaw clenched again, lips pressed into a tight line. "I know my husband." Her eyes were distant, voice barely above a whisper now. "I know him well. I know how he always bragged about one day finding someone worthy, someone he could finally pass on everything to." She swallowed, the emotion tightening in her throat. "If you say you're his disciple, then I know how much he must have treasured you, because he's waited 10 long years to find one." She inhaled shakily, then exhaled, her breath trembling with the weight of restraint. "So your statement was wrong, boy." She reached out and gently rested a hand on Northern's shoulder. "In what world does a disciple protect their master? What I want to know is, was he able to protect you? And the others? How were his final moments? Did he have regrets?"
No.
She murmured, her voice faltering with sorrow-laced fondness. "Knowing that fool, he probably had plenty. I wonder if he ate before he died. He'd definitely have regretted not tasting my rigatoni spice special one last time. And he surely would have." Her words slowed, her voice cracked. She paused, shoulders trembling, holding the pain in her throat like a scream she refused to let escape. Then she looked up at Northern again, forcing out a trembling smile, the kind that tore deeper than tears. "Boy," she whispered, "raise your head." Northern hesitated, but finally obeyed, lifting his gaze. Leary stood before him, radiant in her exhaustion. Her beauty hadn't dimmed, even as her face wore the stains of exhaustion and grief. Sweat clung to her brow, tears traced clean lines down her cheeks, but she still smiled, and that, more than anything, broke his heart. She was trying to stay strong, but her strength was tearing apart, and she didn't even seem to notice. Then, gently, she extended her arms and offered the newborn to him. Northern's brow furrowed, his breath trembling as he stared at the tiny bundle in her arms. She said softly, "You know, I vowed that Burning Storm would be the first to hold his child, and name them. He always had the oddest names for everything. But I wanted this one to matter. I wanted him to look into our baby's eyes and name them himself." She looked at Northern again, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you say? Would you do that for me? In his place?" Northern stepped back slightly, hands shaking. "That is." But she smiled again gently, brokenly. "It's fine. You were the last to see him. I don't know why, but something about you carries his presence, like a shadow that lingers even after the flame has gone out. Please, hold her." He still hesitated. His hands, made for battle, felt too clumsy, too dangerous to cradle something so small, so delicate. He'd never held a child before. What if he hurt her? What if his grip was too strong? Still, slowly, cautiously, he reached forward and accepted the child. He held her beneath his gaze, barely breathing. Something lodged itself in his throat, hard and unmoving, like stone. Every beat of his heart struck against it, splintering him from the inside out. A single tear broke loose and rolled down his cheek. The child blinked up at him with brilliant emerald eyes unmistakably like her father's. "It's a girl," Leary said, her voice lighter now, laced with a fragile joy. "What do you think? Does she look like him?" Northern studied her closely, another tear slipping free. "She does. She's beautiful." Leary gave a quiet, wistful laugh. "What name do you think suits someone like her?" Northern said nothing for a moment. He was afraid for himself, for her, for what the world might demand of this child. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw a storm. Not violent, not wild, but silent and gathering. A tempest waiting for its moment. A force that would one day shake the world. A gentle smile broke out of his lips as he thought of a beautiful name. He glanced at Burning Storm's burnt body and looked back at his smiling and giggling daughter. Burn from ash. Nurea. Chapter 962. Gentle Authority. A hushed silence followed the name. Northern panicked in that brief silence, dread swirling in his chest like a gathering storm. What if he'd unknowingly inherited Shin's questionable naming sense? They weren't bound by blood, but inheritance didn't always need blood. Influence alone could carve its mark. Then, as if sunlight had parted the gloom, Leary's face bloomed with a radiant smile. Nurea. Born from ashes. I love it. He hadn't meant to slight Burning Storm, but, stars, his heart nearly skipped. That smile. That was the first real one she'd given in the last few minutes. It wasn't polite or forced, or weighed down by expectation. It was pure. For that moment, she was lit from within. No titles, no burden of duty, just a woman touched by something soft. But it passed. She slowly reached for Nurea, lifting the child from his hands with a tenderness that silenced even the walls around them. She smiled again, but this time, it carried a quiet ache as she gazed down at the infant, then looked up at Northern. Sir. Rian. He interrupted, then softened. But you can call me Lael. She hesitated. The name seemed to echo in her mind as she tried it out silently. Lael is a beautiful name. I imagine the person who gave it to you must have been beautiful too. He offered a sheepish smile, one corner of his mouth tugging shyly. My mother is indeed very beautiful. Both of them are, he thought, but left it there. She nodded slowly, her expression dimming into something more measured. If it doesn't bother you, Sir Lael, I'd like to keep you a little longer. There's so much to absorb. And with my position, not just as Burning Storm's wife, but the only person in government still pretending to be sensible, grief isn't a luxury. I get to entertain easily. Would you mind if I pressed you for a few things? Northern's face gradually settled, the muscles in his jaw quieting, his posture shifting just slightly. Not rigid, but he understood the shift in tone. Leary commanded presence not with force but with gravity, and he instinctively matched it. He nodded once. All right, Ma. Leary nodded. All right then. Please, give me a few moments. With that, she turned and walked away. Slow, deliberate steps, escorted by the elders. Veiled light rose shakily and followed, the weight of sorrow clinging to his movement like mist. Northern remained behind, watching Leary retreat with a heavy gaze. She was carrying so much, and yet, not a single word of complaint passed her lips. Her posture, her gait, the quiet restraint in her breath. Every detail radiated strength. Not just strength born of will, but the kind carved from pain. Even the way she suppressed her grief, it was frightening. He would have done anything to help her ease that burden. Anything short of giving himself away. She hasn't even accepted he's dead yet. His eyes drifted toward Burning Storm's lifeless form. Throughout their entire conversation, Leary had rarely used the past tense. She still spoke of him as if he were alive, present. It wasn't just denial. It was something deeper. Her heart had not yet caught up with the truth. Northern exhaled, a soft breath that misted into the silence. It's going to be a long process for her, and it hadn't even begun. The thought made his chest ache for her. Several minutes passed. Then Leary returned, the 4 government elders in tow. She stood in front of him, composed now, her features calm, but her shoulders held tight with control. One of the elders, a tall figure with hollow, brooding eyes, held Nurea in his arms like a sacred flame. Leary folded her arms. A slow breath slipped from her lips, then she opened her mouth and warned gently. What comes next will be a barrage of questions. Please bear with me, okay? Northern gave a firm nod. She offered a faint smile, brief, but sincere. Sir Lael, where is Dante now? You know him, right? Northern didn't flinch. His tone was neutral. He's dead. Her eyes widened, but he wasn't finished. Or alive? I don't really know. He paused, then added with sharp calmness. I would say Lieutenant Dante is dead, but there are circumstances that make me want to say otherwise. The one who killed him wasn't me, nor was it Paragon Rizel. It was the prophet that he had been working with, and he was killed by unconventional means. Leary's brow arched. Unconventional means? Northern nodded slightly. Yes, if I had to put it plainly, he was eaten. Eaten? Northern met her gaze without hesitation. Yes, eaten. A deep furrow settled into Leary's expression. Lieutenant Dante was eaten? By this prophet he worked with? That doesn't make any sense. Are you saying he was betrayed? Northern's voice remained even. Apparently so. This prophet, he's the real threat now. I don't know what he's planning, but it feels like he's picking up where Dante left off. Leary's brows knit, confusion flickering across her face. If he's continuing Dante's path, then why kill him? Northern's gaze held hers for a breath, unreadable. Then he shrugged, slow and unbothered. What it looked like to me, he was tired of putting up with Dante. Leary studied him in silence for a few seconds. Then she turned, facing the elders. I'd like you all to excuse us for a few minutes. The fatty officer stepped forward. Lady Leary. In the next few seconds, they exchanged tired glances, but none argued. One by one, they turned and left the chamber, their footsteps echoing with reluctant obedience. Despite their age, she dismissed them with the ease of a mother sending children to bed. As the doors closed behind them, she pivoted back toward Northern. Her tone was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it, grief harnessed into resolve. You can tell me everything now, Sir Lael. I give you my word I will not jeopardize you. If there's information that must remain hidden, I will guard it with my life. You don't have to share anything personal, nothing you're unwilling to reveal. But if it ties to my husband's death or to the fate of the Central Plains, I need to know. She exhaled softly, her voice lowering. Despite my plea, you're not bound by any law. You owe the government nothing. If you choose silence, I will not press you. I'll let you go. Chapter 963, Concerning the Fate of the World. Unlike what Leary was thinking, it wasn't that Northern refused to share the information with her. He was simply cautious about doing so. This wasn't just information that affected Central Plain. It concerned the entire world and the very forces that shaped it. This was a matter involving Ull herself. Northern couldn't be sure if Ull was listening to him. He doubted it, but he didn't understand how she existed. If there was any way for her to eavesdrop, it would be through all drifters. Ull might not have been able to listen in on his conversation with Call, but she could certainly do so with Leary. As a drifter, Leary was bound closer to Ull than he and Call were. This was the risk in sharing the information with Leary. Still, it didn't mean he couldn't say anything at all. He would just have to hold back some details. He let out a breath. All right. First, this concerns the fate of the world. Have you heard about the children of the Dark Continent? Leary tilted her head back slightly. Who hasn't? They call them the return of the Age of Legends. They say someone from among them might become a luminary. Northern's smile carried a touch of sadness as he paused. That's unfortunate. We're too late then. Leary frowned, studying Northern. Two things from his statement puzzled her. What do you mean we're too late? What do you mean we... Wait. Her mouth fell open, but Northern lifted his gaze toward Burning Storm, causing her to look at him with a soft, strange expression. I mean we're too late. Someone else became a luminary before we, the return of the Age of Legends, got the chance. A small, pale smile broke across Leary's face as terror crept into her features. She followed Northern's gaze. She shook her head slightly, struggling to accept what she was hearing. You don't mean... Northern nodded. Yes, Burning Storm became a luminary moments before his death. Sadly, he was drained of essence, and the very realization that brought him to the edge of that evolution, consuming essence, meant his soul couldn't complete its transformation. He died halfway through the process. Leary slowly raised her hands to cover her gaping mouth. She stared at her husband with wide eyes, her expression a tangle of emotions: joy, respect, awe, disbelief. More than anyone, she knew how desperately Rizel had sought to become a luminary, yet had never managed to reach it. He traveled constantly, and they spent long stretches apart because of his quest. Even when he was home, it was nearly all he talked about. Hearing that he had achieved his goal before dying felt like learning he had found the treasure he'd scoured the earth seeking. The world might never know this truth, but that was fine. Knowing it brought her a peace and strength that would help her accept her husband's death when she was finally ready to face it. In fact, she seemed to be slowly turning toward that acceptance now, after this earth-shaking revelation. Northern watched her in silence, giving her the time she needed to process everything. To his surprise, she slowly straightened herself, pushing down the tremors left by the weight of what she'd learned. So, and the other matter, you're one of the children of this dark continent. Northern nodded. She offered a brief smile. It makes sense why Rizel found you worthy enough to be his disciple. She paused before continuing. So what about them? Northern's rough voice cut through the air. During our time in the dark continent, we faced a terrifying enemy. His name was Call. She tilted her head slightly. Call? Northern nodded and continued. I assumed the government would already know this and have the events of the Dark Continent documented. Leary shook her head. It wasn't easy to gather intel when the biggest citadels were protecting those people. They wouldn't cooperate with the government, which wasn't surprising. That's just how drifters have always treated the government. Northern caught the wistful note in her voice but pressed on. Well, Call was like the final boss of the Dark Continent. His goal is to free his master, who would destroy the world simply by existing. I don't know if you've heard of origins and tyrants. Call's master is the origin of chaos. So if he escapes his prison, chaos itself will walk our world. Northern paused to catch his breath while watching her expression. Call almost succeeded, but we stopped him. Only for me to discover that he's the same prophet who's been helping Lieutenant Dante stir up war in the Central Plains. The version we defeated in the Dark Continent was just a fragment of him. I don't know how many more fragments exist, but each one is incredibly powerful, and honestly, I'm getting tired of having to fight him over and over again. But yes, he devoured Lieutenant Dante and is now continuing the war because the only way to free his master is to tip the delicate balance between war and peace. I don't know how much blood he needs to shed to accomplish that. I doubt even he knows. But he won't stop until he gets what he wants. Leary was silent for a long moment. Then she let out a shaky sigh. This Call sounds like a very powerful person. What do you think his soul rank is? Northern chuckled dryly. You still don't understand. He's not from our world at all. I'm not sure where exactly he comes from, but he certainly doesn't follow our world's path of growth. One fragment of his existed as a maelstrom before, and this version may even be as strong as a luminary. For all I know, he could be a tyrant, but he's too weak for me to be certain. So either he's hiding his strength or can't unleash it fully right now. Leary released a shaky breath and stepped back slightly. And you're saying if this guy frees his master, our world will drown in chaos? Northern nodded. Exactly. This truly concerns the fate of the world. Chapter 964. The Devastation of Variolania. It was difficult for Leary to process the entire truth, but she did. Of course, there were countless repercussions tied to it. The truth alone had shifted the very foundation of everything they'd been struggling to protect. Now, they had uncovered that someone was on the verge of reviving a strange quiddity of power, one capable of ending the world. How was she supposed to bring this horrifying reality to the others and convince them to rise for the sake of the entire continent? There were many things weighing on her mind, and topping that list was the knowledge that, with Fugal reduced to ruin, the other nations would inevitably begin to stir. The first to make a move would likely be Sierra. That's if they weren't already in motion. Northern was released after answering a few minor questions, which he did with a deliberate caution, careful not to reveal anything that might alert all. Once that was done, Leary didn't keep him any longer. She asked him to leave. But before he departed, she asked if she would ever see him again. Northern hadn't been sure. Still, he promised she would. He almost regretted it a moment later, silently hoping he wouldn't forget that promise. Afterwards, he and Byron soared into the skies and disappeared beyond the city. Their destination, of course, was clear. Verullania. The streets of the capital city of Verullania roared with devastation. Flames leapt from shattered buildings, licking the sky in orange waves, while people scattered in every direction, running for their lives. The estate had been spared for now, but the problem stretched far beyond its walls. It had unexpectedly become the safest place in the entire city, now that chaos reigned across Verullania. Monsters rampaged freely and humans, no less savage, joined the onslaught. Military soldiers clad in black uniforms swept down into the city like a tide of ruin, pushing their front lines steadily toward the castle. Verullania's own forces surged out in full defense, rallying to protect what was left. At the same time, airships lifted off the ground in staggered bursts, climbing into the smoky skies. Some escaping, others circling back. The entire city had become a maelstrom of chaos, its color that of fire and ash. And rising through it all were the cries of clashing steel and the shrill, gut-wrenching wails of the dying. A tremor rippled through the ground as a calamitous destroyer crashed through the outer wall. A grotesque, tusked creature dripping with ichor, its bony frame wrapped in molten sinew. It howled, and the sound shattered windows, toppling already weakened archways into clouds of brick and dust. The skies, once sapphire, were now stained a blistering crimson. Ash fell with snow, coating armor, rooftops, and corpses alike. A cathedral bell tolled faintly in the distance, though no one rang it, its echo warped by heat and warping winds. Soldiers clashed beneath the tower's shadow, their formations breaking under the relentless advance of the horde. The ground was slick with blood. A child screamed, muffled by the thunderous charge of mounted beasts, half machine, half flesh, ridden by some squad of military revolutionists. Lightning crackled from the tip of a mage's staff, arcing through 3 creatures before vanishing into the void. Moments later, his head rolled, separated cleanly by a man with white short hair and dark eyes who vanished in a blink. A wyvern shrieked above, spiraling downward in a corkscrew of scale and smoke, jaws agape. It slammed into a plaza where nobles once held garden feasts. Now only charred remains and fractured marble fountains remained. Through the haze, a lone banner flapped, tattered but unfallen, bearing the crest of Verullania, a phoenix crowned in stars. And beneath it, a battered captain roared a final command. "Hold the line!" His voice was swallowed by the chaos, but his men obeyed. Not because they believed they would survive, but because nothing remained to fall back to. The entire city was already in ruins, yet they were still shedding sweat, blood, and life to defend the castle, to stop the tide of revolutionists from breaching its gates and claiming it. But that hope was starting to feel like a delusion. They were bound to fall sooner rather than later because these soldiers were simply too strong. They had descended upon the capital without warning, storming in with terrifying airships that blotted out the sky. At the forefront was a towering man with snow-white hair and piercing dark eyes. His face was as still and chiseled as a stone monument. His olive skin glistened under firelight, and even without lifting a weapon, his presence alone was formidable. Every movement he made spoke of overwhelming strength, and his speed was monstrous. Still, the soldiers of Verullania had someone of their own to lean on. He stood atop the castle wall, golden cloak rippling behind him like a torn banner defying the storm. His expression was unreadable, hardened by countless wars. Jagged beards ringed his jaw, and his cold gray eyes scanned the ruined city below. Eyes so drained of warmth, they might as well have been carved from stone. Then, slowly, the man turned his gaze to the distant mountain forests that flanked the outer gate of Verullania. He sighed. How did we get here? What is going on? Clicking his tongue with a trace of disdain, he stepped off the wall, casually dropping from the high ledge. He landed without ceremony. The earth split beneath the weight of his fall, sending debris in all directions. He didn't flinch. He kept walking, unbothered. From the smoke ahead, a twisted monster charged toward him. It resembled a hunched man, but stood nearly 12 meters tall. Its limbs malformed, its mouth yawning open in hunger. Before he could act, another figure intercepted it. A flash of silver cut through the haze. A long sword, gleaming under moonlight, carved a brutal arc through the beast's chest, black ichor spraying like a ruptured tank. The figure glanced his way and shouted, "Prominent leg. Don't worry about this one. Please, save my father's kingdom." The Duke looked at the young man with a flicker of surprise, just for a moment. Then he let out a short laugh and shook his head. These people, always pushing responsibility. Chapter 965, Prominent Leg. However, if the prince himself is personally asking, there's nothing I can do. As the sole duke, Prominent Leg was the most formidable noble and the strongest drifter in all of Variolania. If anyone could save the kingdom, it was him. Everything had unraveled so quickly. Some unknown terrorist faction had struck the airport, and now the entire city was buckling under the weight of a merciless siege. And as if fate hadn't already turned cruel, they couldn't call on the Academy for aid. Not when it had barely withstood an avalanche of monsters. There was no question anymore. Whoever had planned this destruction had done so with brutal precision. But why? Why Variolania? Prominent Leg already had his suspicions about Dante's strange movements. That young military leader should never have had the authority to pull off a decision of this magnitude. Which only proved one thing. Not just Variolania, but every nation had grievously underestimated him. Either way, Dante would live to regret the day he chose to assault Variolania. Was it still possible to turn the tide of a battle already doomed to be lost? That was exactly why they called him Prominent Leg. Because when his legs stepped onto a battlefield, the fight never lasted long. Duke Hanseal scanned the chaos below. His eyes narrowed. A beat passed. Then a thin, sharp grin carved across his face. Found him. He vanished. A streak of gold tore across the air, his cloak streaming behind him. Then, like a golden tempest erupting from the sky, he crashed down into the advancing enemy ranks with thunderous force. Government soldiers flew back like splintered debris, skidding and tumbling across the blood-soaked ground. Prominent Leg surged forward, his body the embodiment of force, cutting through them like a battering storm. He seized one soldier by the head, lifting him effortlessly. With a sharp pivot, he slammed the man into the next soldier behind him. Then, with a brutal turn, he hurled both of them into a third, bulldozing through their formation like a living cataclysm. He turned sharply, scattering them all like leaves in a gale, hurling bodies aside and clearing the ground in one brutal sweep. The soldiers groaned and writhed where they fell, sprawled across the bloodied earth. And at the center of it all stood Prominent Leg, alone, his golden cloak fluttering softly in the wind. He folded his arms and grinned, gaze fixed straight ahead. His gray eyes gleamed calm, yet laced with a cold, senile wickedness. His voice cut through the silence. "What are you waiting for? I've cleared the ground for you." The man standing across from him didn't move right away. The one with white hair and eyes like dark pits. Slowly, he tilted his neck to the right. Bones cracked. Then to the left. Another grim pop echoed. Then he began to walk forward. His face was sharp, angular, carved like a blade. He stood like a titan, fierce and utterly detached from the world around him. With a single tug, he tore his clothes from his body, revealing a massive, sculpted frame. A sprawling tattoo curled across his torso, lines and symbols like an ancient curse etched into muscle and bone. As he shifted his stance, his bones groaned with every motion, cracking with sickening rhythm as though his body was adjusting for violence. He came to a halt before the Duke, staring down with icy indifference. He muttered, voice low and rumbling, "Finally, someone worth fighting. A blast of wind howled suddenly between them, surging through the empty battlefield. It parted the space like a curtain being drawn back, for the clash that now had no choice but to begin. In the next breath they moved. First a blur, then a collision. It was like two iron fortresses smashing into each other. The impact unleashed a shockwave that roared through the air, rippling out in all directions. The very ground beneath them trembled as the wave slammed outward, shaking the battlefield to its core. Prominent Leg struck first, a blur of gold and muscle. His fist swung like a battering ram, aimed straight for the man's jaw. But the white-haired warrior leaned just enough to the side, letting the blow skim past his cheek. The wind from it still split the air with a deafening crack. In that fraction of a second, he countered. A knee shot upward, straight into Prominent Leg's ribs. The Duke grunted, breath hissing through clenched teeth, but his stance didn't falter. He twisted his torso mid-air and brought down his elbow like a hammer. It landed on the man's shoulder. Crack. Bone? Maybe. It didn't matter. The man stepped into the blow, refusing to yield. His fist drove forward, a straight jab that caught Prominent Leg square in the chest, launching him backward several meters. But he didn't fall. He skidded, boots carving trenches in the ground, cloak snapping violently in the wind. He dug his heels in and stopped, his arms uncoiled with barely a breath between beats. He vanished again. Another impact. The air exploded between them as Prominent Leg's fist collided with the man's forearm. Both of them locked in a clash of raw strength. For a moment, they stood locked together, muscles coiled and straining, like two titans trying to crush the world between them. And then they moved. Fists flew. Not wild, not desperate, precise, vicious, unforgiving. Prominent Leg ducked under a hook, spun low, and drove a punch into the man's thigh. The flesh rippled unnaturally, but the man responded with a brutal downward strike, his elbow slamming onto the Duke's spine. Prominent Leg staggered, dropped to a knee, but retaliated immediately, launching himself forward with both fists, battering the man's stomach like war drums. The white-haired warrior didn't block. He absorbed it, then returned the favor. A savage headbutt split the space. The crack echoed like a bell tolling in a dead city. Prominent Leg reeled, but laughed, blood trailing down his brow. You fight like a storm trapped in a man. He was answered by silence. And then, a straight punch that nearly shattered his jaw. Prominent Leg flew. This time he did crash into the ground. Dust and blood kicked up in his wake, carving a bloody trail through the field. But before it could settle, he rose again. No words, just breath. Shallow, rhythmic, controlled. His muscles pulsed, his veins bulged, and then he launched himself forward again. They met once more in the center. A relentless exchange of strikes and blocks. Dodges measured in millimeters, counters born of instinct. The sound of fists meeting flesh, bone striking bone, filled the air like the beat of a war march. Neither yielded. They fought not like men but like ancient weapons brought to life. Each punch was a declaration, each kick a story of violence. They slammed into each other again and again and again, until blood misted the air, until the ground began to split beneath their feet, until the air itself howled with the force of their fury. And still they fought. Chapter 966. A Siege Wall of Offense. Their class continued to resound across the entire battlefield with a chilling intensity. At some point, it even felt like soldiers paused to watch the fearsome and amazing clash of force. The two of them battered each other without talent abilities, none ready to yield under the terrifying power of the other. With another fearsome clash that resounded, both of them staggered back. Blood rolled down the nose of the military man. Despite how ferocious their clash had been, his body was still kind of clean. There were a few bruises here and there, but there was no blood. He trembled as he staggered back and staggered front and slowly straightened. Then he raised his thumb and wiped the blood off his nose and looked at it with an impassive expression. No one has ever made me bled in a while. He raised his head and looked at Prominent Leg. Who are you? Prominent Leg was bleeding more than the man, His beards were smeared with blood, from his mouth and nose, even somewhere at the edge of his brow, and his forehead was dripping with blood. But a wild and fierce grin was aglow on his face. It was in fact, as though his bleak expression had somehow managed to come to life from their few minutes of exchange. His grin seemed to widen. Me? Bah! Pay me no attention, boy. I am just a man that has outlived his time. But many have the habit of calling me Prominent Leg. He tilted his head a little bit. A befitting name indeed. Prominent Leg. Why are you not using your talent? Prominent Leg grinned. Why should I? When you're not using yours. The man was silent for almost a second. Then he exhaled. This battle is going to be a long one. Slowly, his body began to glitter, and an armor wrapped itself around his body. When it was done, he was wearing a heavy metal armor. His feet to his waist was fully cladded in heavy metal. His upper body, however, was still naked, with his roguish tattoo tracing every arc of his torso in a fearsome and devilish manner. He opened his hands and sparks began to join and form, revealing a long and large broadsword. It wasn't so great in length, however. The sheer wideness was enough to strike fear on whoever it would be falling on. However, Prominent Leg only seemed to broaden his grin. Indeed! Indeed! He opened his hands and sparks began to form around his hand. After a while, 2 long swords were in his hands. He lashed them sideways and flew forward. Both of them collided with a shockwave and flew back and bolted forward again. Their swords carved through the air and slammed against each other in quick, ferocious succession. Their legs moved with it, slashing against the landscape powerfully. They moved with unbridled speed, exchanging blows with terrifying force. The battlefield trembled beneath their fury. The military man's broadsword came crashing down like a falling mountain, crushing, unrelenting, a force carved from resolve. But Prominent Leg didn't yield. He crossed his twin blades above his head, bracing against the impact. The shockwave tore dust into a violent spiral, yet he held, teeth bared in a grin. Then, with a deft twist of his wrists, he deflected the blow not away, but sideways, bending the momentum just enough to crack open a fleeting gap. And he struck. His left sword arced upward in a savage slice aimed at the ribs. The military man twisted, but not quickly enough. The blade carved a shallow line along his side, painting his skin red. Before Prominent Leg could close in, the broadsword was already sweeping back, a wide, horizontal cleave that forced him into a backwards leap. But Prominent Leg didn't retreat, he flowed. His footwork was deceptive, movements winding like a serpent's coil. He didn't just press forward or fall back, he curved, shifted, struck from angles that seemed wrong until they landed. His twin blades weren't mere weapons, they were fangs snapping and slithering, slicing in whip-fast flicks, spinning reversals, and stabs that came from nowhere and everywhere. The military man adjusted. His defense was no longer just reactive, it was tactical. Every block turned into a counter, every parry a thunderclap. His footwork was a fortress, unyielding, ironclad. When Prominent Leg feinted high and swept low, the broadsword met him with a ringing crash that sparked the air. Still, Prominent Leg pressed on. He ducked beneath a beheading strike, rolled low, and surged inside the man's guard. His right blade lunged for the gut, only to meet cold metal as the man pivoted, letting the sword glance harmlessly off his armored thigh. Before Prominent Leg could withdraw, a brutal fist collided with his jaw. His head snapped back. Blood sprayed. He staggered, nearly dropped, but even in recoil, his left blade whipped out in a vicious backhand. The military man jerked his head aside just in time, the blade's edge skimming past with a hiss. They broke apart, both panting, chests heaving. Prominent Leg spat blood and grinned. "Ha! You hit like a damned avalanche." The military man wiped his cheek, fingers streaked red. "And you fight like a cornered viper." Prominent Leg's grin widened. "Good. Then you understand." With a sharp flick, he reversed his grip on both swords. Then he moved, not with overwhelming speed, but with terrifying purpose. Every strike was deliberate, every step a part of the dance. He attacked high, dipped low, feinted a thrust, then spun into a sweeping slash at the knees. The military man blocked, parried, countered, but Prominent Leg never stopped shifting. He weaved, struck, vanished and reappeared like the wind. It was like fighting a storm with blades for rain. But the military man was no mere wall. He was a siege. He caught a flicker, Prominent Leg overextending just for a breath, and seized the chance. His broadsword came down in a savage overhead arc. Prominent Leg crossed his blades to block, but the force drove him to one knee. The ground beneath cracked with the impact. For a moment they locked, their brute power bearing down on tempered skill. Then Prominent Leg laughed, and with a violent twist, he split his blades outward, breaking the broadsword's line, and drove his boot straight up into the man's chin. The impact echoed like a gunshot. The larger man reeled, head snapping back. Prominent Leg surged forward, both swords a blur of silver lightning. Chapter 967. A Battle of Persistence. The military man staggered, but his stance never broke. His head snapped up, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. Blood trickled from his lip, but his expression was cold, colder than tempered steel. Prominent Leg's twin swords shrieked through the air, one angled for his throat, the other for his ribs. Clean kill. But the military man moved. His broadsword, still recoiling from the earlier clash, wasn't in position to parry. So he didn't. Instead, he surged forward, slipping inside the arc of the blades. His bare forearm slammed into Prominent Leg's wrist, knocking the high slash off course, while his free hand clamped down on the hilt of the second blade, halting it cold. For a heartbeat they were locked, chest to chest, breath to breath. The iron scent of blood clung to the air between them. Then the military man struck. Crack. His forehead smashed into Prominent Leg's nose. Cartilage crumpled. Blood burst in a vivid spray, speckling the dirt beneath them. Dazed, Prominent Leg's vision swam, but instinct guided his body. He wrenched his trapped sword free and drove a knee upward, only for the military man to shift, catching it on his armored thigh with a heavy thud. The counter came fast. An elbow crashed into Prominent Leg's temple, sharp and brutal. His world tilted. Stars flashed. His wide grin almost flickered, but he straightened, slow and deliberate, spitting blood to the side. His stance reset, blades raised, feet firm. Ha! Now that's a fight. The military man gave no reply. He merely adjusted his grip on the broadsword. The metal groaned under his tightening fingers. Then he charged.
No hesitación.
Just a blur of motion. His sword came down in a savage overhead cleave. Prominent Leg crossed his blades to block. Boom! The ground cracked beneath him. Dust billowed as his boots sank inches into the earth from the sheer force. His arms quaked. Muscles screamed under the weight. But Prominent Leg did not yield. With a roar, he heaved upward, pushing the broadsword back. And in the same fluid motion he spun, unleashing a whip-fast kick toward the man's ribs. The military man took it. Crunch. The blow would have shattered bone in a lesser man. But he only grunted, sliding a step back before slamming his boots down and planting firm. Pain licked at his ribs, but his face stayed unmoved. Instead, he smiled. Not out of joy. Something darker, wilder. A battle-drunk grin carved its way across his face. Your strikes are fading. Are you sure you're still not going to use your talent abilities? Prominent Leg barked a laugh. What a rude and honest boy you are. He paused, eyes narrowing with respect, then let out a long breath. Slowly, he shifted into stance once more. As much as I'd love to, I can't bring myself to strike a defenseless opponent. I don't know why you're not using yours, but it's not in my principles. The military man's grip shifted as he spoke with a voice low. Principles. What a foolish thing to cling to in the face of death. He lunged. This time, his strikes weren't just powerful, they were relentless. Broad, sweeping slashes flowed seamlessly into sudden, razor-precise jabs. He fought like a storm given form, each motion honed to overwhelm, to break, to batter down resistance with unyielding force. Prominent Leg met him, blow for blow. His twin swords blurred through the air, deflecting, countering, striking back with equal ferocity. But he felt it, the shift in momentum. Subtle at first, but undeniable. The man's superior strength was beginning to assert itself, creeping into every exchange like a rising tide. It was only a matter of time before his so-called principle would have to shatter. A feint, a twist. The broadsword reversed mid-swing, hooking under Prominent Leg's guard. Slash. A deep gash tore across his chest. Blood sprayed. He hissed, but didn't falter. Instead, he drove into the pain, turning it into momentum as he thrust one sword straight toward the man's heart. The military man twisted. The blade sank into his shoulder instead, tearing through flesh and muscle. He gritted his teeth, not a sound escaping him. Instead, he grabbed the embedded sword with his free hand, heedless of how the edge carved into his palm, and yanked Prominent Leg forward. Crack. An armored knee slammed into Prominent Leg's gut. The old warrior folded. The air punched from his lungs. But even as he doubled over, his second sword came whipping upward in a vicious arc. The military man jerked back, but not quite fast enough. The blade's tip carved a red line from his chin to cheekbone. They broke apart, panting. Blood dripped between them, painting the dirt in slow, steady beats. Around them, the battlefield had fallen silent. Even the distant clash of war felt muted, like the world itself was holding its breath. Prominent Leg wiped his mouth, smearing crimson across his beard. His grin was ragged, but the fire behind it burned bright. You intend to force my hand, don't you? The military man touched the line on his cheek, smearing blood across his fingertips. He stared at it, then raised his eyes. They burned not with rage but something colder, something far more ruthless. First, I'll show you how foolish principles are in the face of death. Then I'll break you, make your old body tremble with fear, and in shame you'll use your talent abilities. Prominent Leg chuckled. What a very strange man. Do you want to die that badly? He raised his swords again. The military man shifted his stance. And then, the air itself seemed to shatter as their blades clashed once more. This time, the military man fought with a different kind of fury, not just raw strength but ruthless precision. Every strike was a calculated dismantling, each step a hammering rhythm meant to break Prominent Leg down. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to crush. Prominent Leg's twin swords danced, deflecting, parrying, carving arcs through the air. But the weight behind each of the military man's blows sent violent tremors up his arms. His muscles screamed. His breath came in ragged gasps, lungs seizing with every motion. You feel it, don't you? The military man's voice was a low growl, his broadsword crashing down like a falling guillotine. Your body failing you. Prominent Leg twisted aside just in time. The blade gouged a trench into the earth where his head had been. He lashed out with a desperate slash. But the military man caught his wrist mid-swing. Crack. His grip was merciless. Bones strained beneath the pressure. Prominent Leg's fingers twitched, then gave out. One sword clattered to the ground. Before he could recover, a fist slammed into his ribs. GHK. He staggered back, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. But the assault didn't stop. A sweeping kick took his legs out from under him. He hit the dirt hard, barely rolling aside as the broadsword came down like a guillotine, burying itself where his skull had been moments ago. He kicked upward on instinct. His boot slammed into the man's jaw. But the military man didn't budge. His head snapped back slightly, but his grip on Prominent Leg's ankle held firm, unyielding. He spat to the side, voice coiled with contempt. Pathetic. Then, without pause, he lifted Prominent Leg and slammed him into the ground like a broken doll. Boom! Dust erupted. Prominent Leg's vision whited out for a second as agony screamed through his spine. He barely registered the next impact. Another bone-rattling slam into the earth. Then another. Each one knocked the breath from his lungs. Each one felt like a death knell sounding through his body. The military man wasn't fighting anymore. He was breaking him. With a final, contemptuous heave, he flung Prominent Leg across the battlefield. The old warrior tumbled, skidding through blood-soaked dirt until he came to a halt on his knees. His remaining sword was still clenched in his grip, but his arm trembled with the effort. His breath came in wet, stuttering gasps. Blood leaked from his lips, his nose, his brow. The military man strode forward, broadsword resting across his shoulder. His expression was carved from ice. Still clinging to that principle? He mocked. Still refusing to use your talent? Prominent Leg coughed, spitting red. His fingers tightened around his blade.
He he he.
A broken, bloody chuckle escaped him. Then, slowly, he pushed himself upright. His legs shook. His frame swayed. His body screamed for rest. But he stood. You're a real piece of work, kid. The military man paused, watching him closely. Prominent Leg raised his sword. But if you think this is enough to break me. His grin returned, cracked, bloodied, but unyielding. You've got another thing coming. The military man's eyes narrowed. Then, with slow intent, he planted his broadsword into the earth. Fine. He cracked his knuckles. Then I'll do it with my bare hands. He lunged. Prominent Leg swung. The military man ducked low and drove a fist into his gut. URK. A second punch cracked into his ribs. A third shattered into his jaw. Prominent Leg's head whipped back. But before he could collapse, the man seized his throat and lifted him off the ground. Look at you, he hissed, voice low and venom-laced. Holding on to something so useless, principles in the face of death. My face. Childish, for someone your age. Prominent Leg, or whatever you're called. The look in Prominent Leg's eyes dimmed, just slightly. But his grin didn't falter. If anything, it sharpened. There was no fear in his face. He was enjoying this. The clash, the pressure, the pain. He wanted more of it. But even so, it was a losing battle. The military man was stronger. Of that, there was no question. Prominent Leg was a sage, and yet he was certain the man before him was at least an ascendant. Maybe even a paragon. And that only made it more baffling. Why keep demanding he use his talent? Why not end it? Why fight like this when he could break him without even trying? Was it pleasure, an urge to break him at his peak? Or was there something else? Could it be he couldn't use his own talent until Prominent Leg used his first? The thought twisted through his mind, hazy but persistent. Maybe he wasn't right, but he was close. He could feel it, which meant this brutal, punishing battle was reaching its final acts. Chapter 968. Sure hit. Prominent Leg slowly straightened. His face was a ruin, smeared with blood, one eye swollen shut. Yet a calm, almost serene smile lingered on his lips. He extended his hand, and with slow deliberation, a small black pouch shimmered into existence. Opening it with care, he withdrew a glass vial filled with a thick, crimson liquid. He raised it to his lips and drank. A wistful look crossed his face as he stared at the empty bottle. Then he exhaled softly and tossed it aside. That was when something shifted, something that drew a dark frown from the military man. Prominent Leg's wounds began knitting together. The blood on his face evaporated like dew under sunlight, and a faint glow returned to his skin, lending it a vitality that hadn't been there moments before. Oh? So you had a trick up your sleeve after all. Prominent Leg offered a lazy shrug. Haha, I stumbled upon this little hotcake somewhere deep in the Empire. They call it the Red Miracle. Strange drug, heals just about anything. Rare, of course. But you can't really fault a senile old geezer like me for playing a little dirty. The military man stared, stone-faced. It doesn't matter what trick you pull. I'll just break you again. Prominent Leg grinned wide. Oh hoo, I like that fire. But I've already figured you out. He shifted his stance. A low hum began to resonate from his frame as soft yellow essence threaded through his limbs. The air around his legs rippled, warped, like heat rising off sun-scorched stone. The military man's expression tightened. His grip firmed around the hilt of his broadsword as the battered old warrior stood poised to explode. He glared at Prominent Leg and muttered, "Finally!" The Duke exhaled a long, measured breath and smiled. "Boy, you have no idea what's coming." Then his legs vanished in a blur. The ground beneath him detonated as he launched forward. Not with a sprint, but a kick so forceful it cracked the earth. Afterimages shimmered in his wake. The military man barely got his blade up in time. Prominent Leg's heel slammed into the broadsword like a meteor crashing down from the heavens. The sheer impact sent the soldier skidding backward, his boots carving deep trenches in the soil. His arms buckled, trembling from the blow. And before he could even blink, Prominent Leg was airborne, twisting midair like a spinning top caught in a cyclone. His opposite leg cut through the air in a vicious roundhouse, aimed squarely at the man's skull. The military man ducked, but not fast enough. A crescent of fire erupted from the arc of the kick, tearing through the space where his head had been. The heat grazed his cheek, burning hot enough to sting. His eyes widened for the first time. Fire! Prominent Leg landed lightly, knees bent, legs coiled like springs. Not just fire, boy. Then he flickered. One moment he stood firm, the next gone. A brutal knee drove into the military man's gut before he could react. The air fled his lungs in a gasp drowned by blood. He staggered. Then a spinning heel cracked into his ribs, the blow hurling him sideways like a ragdoll. He crashed through a crumbling wall, stone exploding around him in jagged bursts. But Prominent Leg didn't stop. He leapt, twisting midair. Heaven's descent. His leg came down like a guillotine from the sky. The military man rolled just in time. The ground ripped open as Prominent Leg's heel struck, a sharp crack echoing across the battlefield. The earth fractured beneath the blow, fissures spiderwebbing in every direction. Dust surged up in a wave, and the shockwave blasted nearby soldiers off their feet, scattering them like leaves in a gale. The military man scrambled upright, breath ragged, blood running down his chin. His chest heaved with effort. Cracks lined his lower armor, deep and spreading. And Prominent Leg? He stood at the center of the crater, one leg still embedded in the shattered earth. Slowly, he lifted it out, fragments of stone crumbling from his foot. Then he rolled his neck with a satisfying crack, eyes burning with quiet fire. How about now? Is this enough for you to use your talent? The military man wiped the blood from his mouth, then grinned. Barely, but I can see where your name truly comes from. It's your true name, isn't it? Prominent Leg chuckled, then looked down at him. Telling you my true name would make things a little too obvious. And where's the fun in playing all my cards at once? But maybe I'll reconsider. If you retreat now and stop attacking my home, you can always come back in 20 years, after I'm dead. The man gave a dry laugh, then the steel returned to his eyes. He surged forward with raw force, hurling his broadsword in a deadly arc. But Prominent Leg was already gone. Too slow. His leg snapped out, unleashing a blinding flurry. 100 heavenly kicks. The air screamed as afterimages erupted around him. Dozens of blazing kicks, each one crashing down like a cannonball, each one cloaked in fire. The military man raised his sword just in time. The impacts hammered into him, relentless. Each strike landed with surgical precision, driving him backward. His boots scraped deep into the ground, his muscles strained against the storm. Yet the blows kept coming. His sword groaned, the metal cracking beneath the punishment. Then came the final kick. Not fast, not flashy, just inevitable. Prominent Leg's heel drilled into the sword with a sound like a mountain splitting open. The weapon shattered, a burst of sparks and metal, and the military man flew, his body tearing through the battlefield like a meteor. He crashed through rubble, tore through earth and stone, before skidding to a halt, half buried in the wreckage. Silence. Prominent Leg exhaled. Steam hissed from his legs. His body throbbed with pain. Each breath burned his chest. but his grin was feral. That's what happens when you wake the old dogs. Then, a hand emerged from the debris. The military man pushed himself up, body battered, armor shattered. Yet his eyes burned with a wild, ravenous light. Good. He spat blood, his voice low and steady. Now I don't have to hold back either. Prominent Leg's grin widened. Heh. Heh heh. Did I make you angry? Chapter 969, Usurper. Ultron had been noticing something peculiar about Prominent Leg's kicks, beyond their terrifying firepower. They struck with uncanny timing. Naturally, Ultron's first talent ability had always been utility-based. He wasn't much of a fighter. His talent leaned toward practicality, not battle. That was before he became a paragon. It had barely been a week since that awakening. He was still adapting to his new capabilities. Yet even in that short time, Ultron had already become this formidable. A tempest in the making. Despite wielding a utility talent, life never spared him the brutality of conflict. He'd been hurled into the pit of hell more times than he could count. And every time, he'd crawled out with bloodied fingers and a heart that refused to stop beating. He remembered the Tier 7 rift shatter that swallowed his entire village whole. He remembered the military ship tossing him overboard to lighten the load during a storm, left to survive in a sea swarming with beasts that reeked of bloodlust. And he survived. He clung to wreckage and drifted through the shrieking dark, surrounded by snarling horrors that tore each other apart in the water around him. He fought. He bled. He endured. And now he was here. There was no way some past his prime drifter, clinging to fame and old strength, would be enough to take him down. And now that he'd finished analyzing Prominent Leg's talent with his first ability, it was time to use it. Ultron began to walk forward. Each step crushed broken stone and shattered metal beneath his boots. He moved with the calm detachment of a predator that had already decided its prey. Your leg, he began, his voice low and deliberate, has impeccable timing, as if you possess a talent that calculates footwork, distance, spatial drift, and time flow all at once. Prominent Leg chuckled, arms crossed. Oh, thank you for the compliment. I wasn't complimenting you, Ultron replied, tone flat. I was stating the obvious. You have a luck ability, don't you? Prominent Leg's smile faltered for half a second. A flicker. His narrowed eyes betrayed the shift, only for a moment, then settled back into ease. And so? He asked. What does knowing that do for you? Ultron smiled. Not the kind that bore teeth or smugness, but one that mirrored the stillness of night after a storm. Cold, quiet, absolute. My name is Ultron, he said simply. Figured you should know before you die. As those words left his lips, the battlefield quaked. Cracks spiderwebbed beneath his feet, the ground rebelling against the surge of power that leaked from his frame. His body began to crackle, lined with streaks of whitish essence, like threads of lightning tangled in his veins. His eyes glowed with an eerie, soul-deep luminance, like ghost fire trapped in ice, and locked onto Prominent Leg with terrifying precision. Then, he moved. The shift was seamless, fluid, predatory. His speed, and the grace behind it, bore a striking resemblance to Prominent Leg's motion. But there was something more beneath it, something colder, more terrifying, like the calm silence before a city is swallowed whole. Ultron's fist blurred forward, trailing an unseen force. It carried the same devastating luck effect, an inevitability baked into its motion, that ensured it would always connect. Prominent Leg twisted aside just in time, but the air screamed as the punch grazed his ribs. A glancing blow, just a whisper of contact. And yet, bones splintered beneath it. Prominent Leg staggered back with a sharp gasp, pain shooting up his side like wildfire. Ultron didn't hesitate. His elbow surged upward in a brutal arc, flames bursting around it. Not just fire, but something darker, something hungrier, like the breath of a dying star. Prominent Leg crossed his arms to guard. The impact slammed into him. He was hurled backward, boots gouging twin trenches in the dirt as he struggled to stay upright. His forearms burned, blistering from the unholy heat that clung to the strike like venom. Ultron pressed forward. Now his body was cloaked in that same distortion that once shimmered around Prominent Leg's legs. But it pulsed stronger, sharper, warped by something deeper. "You rely too much on your legs," Ultron said, voice low, unfazed. "I don't know if it's a flaw in your talent, or just a flaw in you." Then, his fingers snapped out like lashes, each movement precise, every strike laden with that inevitable hit aura. Prominent Leg dodged the first. The second swept past, just barely missing. The third. Blood splashed as Ultron's pinky finger sliced through Prominent Leg's shoulder like a blade forged from inevitability itself. Prominent Leg hissed, staggering to the side, heart pounding. His thoughts scrambled for air. "This bastard. He's not just copying me. He's evolving it." Ultron flexed his hands slowly, flames dancing between his fingers like serpents made of heat and intent. "Fire is just combustion," he murmured, gaze never leaving Prominent Leg. "And combustion." His fist clenched, and a nova burst forth. Black and crimson flames erupted around him, the sheer heat warping the air, bending light itself in waves of searing distortion. "Can be refined." Prominent Leg gritted his teeth for a beat before he exhaled, and suddenly laughed. It wasn't defiance. It was madness threaded with pride. A grin streaked with blood and fury. "Ha! Ha ha ha! So what? You stole my tricks? Fine." His foot slammed down. "Then let me show you how a real master uses them." The earth shattered beneath him as he lunged forward, a blur wreathed in blue-white fire. His legs moved like whips of divine fury, each step ripping trenches in the battlefield. Ultron didn't flinch. He met him head-on. And then it began. Their clash was no longer a battle, it became a cataclysm. A storm of flesh and fire and force. Every kick Prominent Leg launched, Ultron mirrored, but not with legs. With arms, elbows, knees. Each strike of Ultron's landed harder, cleaner, deadlier. Prominent Leg spun, his heel whistling through the air toward Ultron's temple. Ultron caught it mid-spin. His fingers locked around the ankle like steel jaws. Then came the sneer. Predictable. He crushed the joint. Prominent Leg screamed as bones popped and twisted beneath the grip. But even in agony, he didn't stop. His other leg lashed upward in a brutal arc, an uppercut kick born of desperation and rage. Ultron leaned back, letting the strike sail past his face. But the flames didn't miss. A geyser of yellowish fire burst from the kick's arc, engulfing Ultron in a searing, pulsing inferno that swallowed him whole. Silence. Just the crackle of fire licking through the air. Smoke billowed. Cinders floated like ash-winged moths. Then a hand shot through the blaze. Ultron emerged, body charred, blackened in patches like scorched armor. His skin steamed, his frame cracked, but his eyes were still glowing with an eerie and dangerous light. Chapter 970. The Beginning of Destruction. Prominent Leg watched with an amused expression, a small grin still playing at the corners of his lips as his eyes locked onto Ultron's frame. The massive soldier was a far cry from how he'd looked when the battle began. His body was carved with countless wounds, blood streaming down his face and torso in winding rivers. Bruises bloomed across his skin like ink stains, dark and spreading. Yet his eyes hadn't dulled. If anything, they burned even fiercer now, colder and more dangerous than before. That quiet intensity made the Duke begin to grow uneasy, his confidence faltering. But Prominent Leg kept grinning, undeterred. "You're strong. Makes one wonder. Where in the world has the government been hiding people like you?" he said, voice laced with irony. "Were they breeding war machines in the shadows, and now what? They finally feel ready to bare their fangs through some lousy young paragon? After everything the Alliance of Nations has done for the prosperity of that government, this is how they repay us." Ultron remained silent, indifferent. He stood like a monolith, unshaken, unbending. His very presence casting a weight across the battlefield that was hard to ignore. Around them chaos still raged. The clash of steel, the shrieks of monsters, and the thunder of collapsing buildings echoed through the war-torn city. Fighters scrambled to defend the walls from being overrun. And yet, amidst the carnage, a few soldiers, some even civilians, had paused just long enough to witness the standoff. Their eyes flicked between the two figures locked in silent tension. Then Ultron moved. Just slightly. His gaze narrowing. His focus tightening on the man before him like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "It's useless." His voice was low but heavy enough to pierce the din. "The question you ask is useless. I hate the government as much as I hate the alliance of nations." Prominent Leg's expression darkened. His grin vanished. Fingers curled into fists. "And yet you fight for them." Ultron remained silent for a few moments. His eyes seemed distant, unfocused, like he was peering through time rather than the man before him. Yet even in stillness, with his strong, angular features cast in cold light, he looked anything but vulnerable. There was a threat in the quiet. Tension. Then he exhaled, subtle, almost soundless. "I see. You still don't understand." Prominent Leg's eyes narrowed slightly. "Understand what?" "That the entire continent is under siege. The government, the nations, everything will collapse." Silence hung for a beat. Then Prominent Leg erupted into laughter. Wild, unrestrained. He threw his head back as the sound tore from his throat, almost defiant in its madness. The fit of laughter only lasted a few seconds before he staggered, grimacing and clutching at his ribs, his injuries biting back with sharp pain. He inhaled raggedly, forcing himself upright once more. A crooked grin curved across his face as he fixed his gaze on Ultron. "Funny. Very funny. The continent is under siege, you say? That's the best joke I've heard in years. You're going to bring down 25 nations? Including an empire that holds 40% of the continent's population? The first nation to ever rise in the Central Plains." Ultron didn't flinch. His expression was stone, void of mockery, of warmth, of doubt. "All will fall, starting with Variolania." Prominent Leg's grin faltered, warping into something darker. His eyes sharpened. "Why Variolania?" Ultron looked around the battlefield with a distant, hollow stare, as if searching for something he couldn't quite see. "Because that's the only way the Academy can be destroyed." Prominent Leg's expression soured. His mouth thinned, eyes tightening with a dangerous grimace. "What?" In that moment, pieces began to shift, sliding into place inside his mind with a weight that made his stomach turn. One of the first signs of this conflict had been the airships. All stolen. Every last one, hijacked before the airport was obliterated. It hadn't seemed part of a greater strategy, just a troubling wave of thefts that had grown bolder over the past few months. Airports attacked. Supply lines sabotaged. The Alliance had dismissed them as isolated incidents. Minor insurgencies. Not worth prioritizing. But now it reeked of orchestration. His gaze sharpened to a blade's edge. "Don't tell me, you people collaborated with terrorists. You stole the airships to trap the students, so they couldn't return to the Academy?" Ultron offered a faint smile, barely more than a shift in his lips. "The Prophet is a very shrewd man. I don't know where he found those cultist freaks, but they've been quite useful to our cause." Prominent Leg was seething, every muscle in his face tight with fury. "These are innocent children," he snapped. "What do you gain from destroying the Academy?" Ultron gave a slow nod, his expression calm, eerily so. His voice rumbled with thick indifference, heavy and unmoved. "They are innocent children. That's why we've taken them away from the harm that's coming. Then we'll release the ancient monster sealed beneath their school. Let it rage. Milwa's legacy. We'll reduce all of it to ash." Prominent Leg's face blanched. For the first time, visible fear crept across his features. "Why?" he shouted. "That thing could destroy the entire continent." Ultron gave a tired shrug, lips curling into a weary smile. "Then now you understand how we'll deal with the Empire." The words sank into Prominent Leg like ice. Slowly, the reality began to settle. The scope of what Ultron had just revealed pressed into his chest like a crushing weight. The grin that once danced on his face was gone, replaced by a grim, hollow frown. "What you're doing is senseless slaughter," he said quietly, the heat in his voice simmering into something colder, deeper. "All for what? What do you gain from rebelling against the entire continent? From destroying everything?" Ultron grinned. "A new age." He leaned forward slightly, the shift in his body subtle but loaded with intent. Prominent Leg's voice burst out, sharp as a blade. "This is madness. You think this is a battle you can win." But Ultron remained indifferent, even as a glint of satisfaction danced behind his eyes. His voice came low and final. "We must." Then he vanished. Not with speed, not in a blur, but with inevitability. Prominent Leg's eyes widened as Ultron's fist drove into his gut. He folded, air erupting from his lungs in a wet, guttural gasp. Before he could even register the pain, an elbow slammed into his spine, sending him crashing face first into the dirt. He tried to rise, but a foot came down on his wrist, causing his bones to splinter beneath the weight. "Gah!" Ultron leaned in, his voice a whisper laced with steel. "This is what happens when you cling to the past." His other hand gripped Prominent Leg's hair. He wrenched the old warrior's head up, then smashed it back down into the earth. Once, twice, blood sprayed. Prominent Leg's vision swam, darkness bleeding in at the edges. His body screamed, his mind raged, but his limbs refused to move. Ultron stood upright, gazing down at the shattered legend below. "You were strong, but strength alone isn't enough." He raised his foot and stomped down on Prominent Leg's ribs. "Not in this world." Prominent Leg's body jolted, a strangled cry ripping from his throat. Ultron lifted his foot again. "Not in this era." Another rib cracked, shattered. Prominent Leg's fingers twitched, his vision blurred. "Fading fast." Ultron raised his foot for the final strike. But then, something fell from the sky. The world trembled as it struck. It moved too fast. No one caught a clear glimpse before it collided with the ground, shattering the earth in an eruption of force. Shockwaves rippled outward, tearing debris into the air like shrapnel from a bomb. A dust cloud exploded, swallowing everything in an instant. The battlefield fell into a stunned hush. Even the monsters recoiled, not just from the impact, but from something deeper, something primordial they could feel. Inside the thick veil of dust, Ultron frowned. The indifference was gone. His face tightened with sharp caution, and the unmistakable sting of displeasure. That final stomp, meant to crush Prominent Leg beneath his heel, had been stopped. And now, he was staring at the one who'd interrupted. A foot rested beneath his own, halting his momentum entirely. But it wasn't just physical strength. Ultron could feel it. An invisible force, radiating from the boy before him. It pressed down on his body like unseen gravity, locking his limbs in place. He couldn't move, not an inch. The boy stood calmly, neck slightly tilted as he gazed up at Ultron. His white hair swayed gently in the air, untouched by the chaos. His eyes, blue, tranquil, yet impossibly deep, looked as though they held oceans. And at the bottom of those oceans, something dangerous stirred. Ultron slowly withdrew his foot and dropped it. "Who are you?" The white-haired boy smiled, his eyes glinting with a dark glee. "I am a student of the Academy, the one whom you all are gonna destroy." Chapter 971. Toddler. As Northern flew, he had more time to observe how his body worked now. To put it simply, he felt his body relate with the environment at a higher level than it ever had. But then again, his body had not exactly been relating with the environment at all before now. What made the difference was his hypersenses and intensified muscle formation. He could reach out to his surroundings at a profound level, and that was why he could even fly without having a flight talent. But now it was different. He couldn't just reach out to the surroundings. He was perpetually in harmony with the world through the entropy flow of everything. From the soft breeze to the invisible heat beneath the ground, to the essence buried in the unseen weaves of the air. He could forge a connection at a much deeper level. He didn't particularly need to turn his eyes to see. It was more like all the directions in front of him bent into his view, and somehow he could just see them all. It was the same for hearing and smelling. The world seemed to acknowledge him in a different way. Not as a master but more like a friend, a fondly cherished one. Not to mention the fact that he discovered he could also absorb the entropy of his surroundings and use it to strengthen his body. He tried this the moment he noticed it and felt his body grow slightly hotter. But everything entered a new level of intensity, and without expecting it, he streaked through the air like lightning. If he hadn't gained that strange sight where directions bent into his view no matter the angle, Northern would have probably crashed or tumbled because he couldn't see clearly while speeding so fast. However, he managed to adapt mid-flight. Although there were probably more benefits he could gain from the improvement, he now understood his evolved body at a fundamental level, and that felt satisfying. He flew past the forest where the party of drifters that left Lithia were still trapped. They were pushing back against a horde of monsters and doing very well at that. With his summons present, there seemed to have been no significant losses or any at all. But their pace seemed slow. Northern, of course, did not expect them to have reached Variolania by now. It took him almost 2 days to get to Lithia from Variolania, and with a large number of drifters it was bound to take longer. In fact, it was impressive they'd covered so much distance, though they still had a long way to go before reaching Variolania, and the horde of monsters seemed to be increasing. The moment he passed overhead, his summons all glanced up and at that instant rained down devastating blows of terrifying slaughter on the monsters. It caused the party to surge forward quickly and baffled the drifters as to why. But the sudden boost soon faded, weighed down by tired humans who needed to rest. Eventually, Northern reached Variolania, and the first thing that demanded attention was a devastated battlefield in the center of the city. A large crater sat at its heart, and there were several other craters with broken buildings scattered all around. The voice of the man in broken armor, with blood running down his face and fresh injuries scattered across his body, reached Northern's ears. "Don't tell me, you people collaborated with terrorists. You stole the airships to trap the students, so they couldn't return to the academy?" Then the other large man, who was even more wounded but standing with greater dominance, responded after a faint smile. "The Prophet is a very shrewd man. I don't know where he found those cultist freaks, but they've been quite useful to our cause." Northern frowned as he continued to listen to the conversation while floating high above in the sky. It was midnight and the twin moons were dim, the sky especially dark, so no one saw him. Certainly not since everyone was busy fighting for their lives. He also erased his presence, another boon of his new body. Taking advantage of his close bond with the world, he could erase the subtle entropy emission from his body that formed his presence, which other drifters could sense and use to gauge how strong he was. Right now, it was very possible for him to be standing before a man who wasn't looking his way, and the man would have no idea. Of course, he could also, with the entropy relationship, do the complete reverse of this. He stayed up and observed the battle, and finally, as he saw it coming to an end, Northern changed his name to Titan's Reckoning and dropped. Northern glared up at the indifferent man. He certainly was strong, and his talent was very unique too. Not to mention, he was a paragon as well. Apparently, Lieutenant Dante had gone really far with his plan to create paragons. And Cal most definitely had a lot to do with how this was even possible in such a short amount of time. The broad man's thick voice broke out, almost pushing the air itself. "A student of the academy. Huh, what is a toddler like you doing on the grounds of Providence?" Northern stared at him blankly, his eyes blinking twice before he forced out a grin. "This bastard did not just call me a toddler." Ultron raised his hand immediately, sucking in all the air as he did, and he brought the hand down on Northern like a hammer. Before the hand could even dive down though, he felt something plummet into his stomach, and for a moment the world felt blank. His vision turned white, all the sound in his environment blanked out. He didn't even know it, but it seemed his brain shut down in that moment. It was almost as if he was taken out of existence. His body folded forward, exploding a massive torrent of air blast that threw debris into the air from his back. Then another round of shockwaves tore behind his back in a massive circle before his body vanished. Chapter 972. Presence. The military man's body blurred as uncontrolled force launched him through the air. He crashed into the first building, already crumbling from an enormous maelstrom. A creature that looked like a twisted mix between a massive lizard and a jackal. The military man's body tore straight through the monster with brutal cutting force, punching through the second building and out the other side. His body rolled through the air, tumbling low before crashing into the third building, finally slamming to a bone-jarring stop against its weakened inner walls. A moment later, the entire structure collapsed on him. Prominent legs sprawled on the ground, blood pooling beneath him as his breath came in ragged gasps. His eyes widened with confusion, stress creasing his already pale face, as he struggled to understand how such a devastating blow could come from this fragile-looking boy. He had crossed blows with the military man. He knew exactly how strong the man was. A siege wall, impossible to budge no matter how hard he tried. And yet, with one strike from someone who didn't look half as strong, the man had folded and flown like paper in the wind. Northern looked down at Prominent Leg and studied him for a moment. He crouched down and examined the man's opened guts more closely. Then he slowly placed a hand over the wound. At once, Prominent Leg let out a guttural cry as a hissing sound seeped from the point of contact. Northern nodded and smiled faintly. I stopped your bleeding using a mix of cold and heat. Mostly heat, I just added a touch of cold so it wouldn't hurt as much. Though I imagine it still hurt like hell. The Duke was still recovering from the searing pain, panting heavily. But he looked at Northern and nodded with what politeness he could manage. Thank you. Northern stood up, the smile lingering on his lips. Don't mention it. As he slowly turned away, Ultron was already upon him. His fist tore forward with cold, terrifying speed, just a breath away from crushing Northern's skull. However, Northern's faint smile remained unchanged. His eyes didn't flinch or waver, even with the sudden assault bearing down on him. He threw an uppercut from below, smashing it into Ultron's jaw before the incoming blow could land. The uppercut resounded like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves rippling outward before Ultron was launched skyward. Northern lowered himself slightly and took off, shattering the ground beneath him as debris flew backward. His body blurred with speed, arriving at the point where Ultron was being hurled. He joined his hands together and raised them over his head. Using Earthbreaker, he brought them down. Earthbreaker was a talent ability designed to shatter the ground. But Northern was slowly grasping the flexible nature of talent abilities the more time he spent with them. He didn't need to use it on actual ground. His opponent's body could serve as earth of sorts. And this situation was perfect for the talent ability to shine. As his joined hands fell upon Ultron, what the man had felt before paled in comparison. This time, his consciousness went black. The entire night trembled as a colossal shockwave tore through the air in a perfect circle. Then Ultron crashed into the ground, sending another shockwave rippling outward with debris at terrifying speed. People and monsters alike were thrown back, flying dozens of meters. Buildings cracked and crumbled as devastation drowned everything that had been happening before. The battlefield below seemed to enter a silent pause as the aftermath of the devastating crash settled. Soldiers helped each other rise from the rubble while even monsters scrambled to their feet, ready to resume their mindless slaughter. Above it all, a boy floated in the dark sky with a look of slight surprise on his face. He looked at his hands. No doubt about it. His talent abilities had grown stronger, more potent. A wild grin spread across his face. Damn. I can even feel it in my veins. I've definitely been missing out on what I should have built my entire life upon. Chaos and Void were cheat skills intoxicating to use, but these weren't so bad either. If he could master blending all his talents together, he was bound to be as strong as even Chaos and Void would make him. Perhaps even stronger. Of course, there were some things he could never replace that Void offered him. The most important was the gift of his summons. Northern clenched his fist with renewed resolve and slowly descended. All eyes on the battlefield were on him, his snow-white hair flowing in the subtle wind of the cold night. He wore a dark blue inner shirt with a cross neck that looked like ancient Eastern garb, paired with black pants whose lower edges seemed torn. His boots were long gone, torn from the battle with Dante and discarded while flying here. Northern glanced at the remaining monsters. 4 of them. 1 maelstrom, 2 destroyers, and 1 behemoth. He moved sharply, vanishing before everyone's eyes. A terrifying, invisible weight fell upon the atmosphere, as if a mountain the size of the entire sky was about to crush them. Everyone trembled for a brief moment, monsters and humans alike. In that instant, using the gravitational force of weight of the world, Northern strengthened his fist with colossal force and completely pulverized the maelstrom's head from its body. The massive creature stood headless for a moment before collapsing. Its head, with 3 vicious maws placed around it, hit the ground with a wet thud. Before it even fell, Northern was already onto the second. The air trembled and scattered violently at his sudden arrival, causing the first destroyer to stagger back. It was a massive humanoid creature with 4 arms ending in crudely long, sharp claws. Its elongated head bristled with needle-like teeth. Northern had already switched to a new name. He raised his hand, cutting with an invisible blade of momentum, then swiped forward with ease. From the monster's shoulder down to its torso, everything sliced clean and fell, letting out a gory spray of black, putrid blood. He ended the second destroyer by simply passing through it. The last behemoth died split in half from head to toe. Chapter 973. The Outskirt Boy. The battlefield lay wrapped in unnatural silence. Northern froze his entire body with ice manipulation, then warmed it back up. This left his skin slick with moisture that mingled with the blood staining his form, creating crimson rivulets that traced down his frame. Meanwhile, both Verulanian soldiers and military forces remained frozen in place. They couldn't even attack each other anymore. They simply stood there, watching this strange and incomprehensible figure cleanse himself of blood in such an otherworldly manner. Northern stepped away from the monster corpses, casting one final glance at them before his brow furrowed. I didn't even harvest the cores. Again. How careless I've become, TSK. Even monsters deserve that courtesy. One mustn't forget the fundamentals. He snapped his fingers. A clone materialized instantly, moving toward the nearest corpse and crouching down to begin its work. Northern walked away slowly, surveying his surroundings as he moved. Silence blanketed everything. Everyone was trying to retreat as far as possible. Eventually, someone approached him. A tall man with golden beard and hair cascading down his shoulders reached him and bowed his head respectfully before speaking.
I am Trisvelja von Verulania.
Northern's eyes widened slightly as he studied the man before him. My word! The first prince of Verulania himself. He grasped the man's hand and shook it enthusiastically, offering a small bow. What an honor to meet you in person. I grew up on Verulania's outskirts, and I've followed news of your remarkable achievements since childhood. The kingdom is truly blessed to have you. The prince stared back at Northern with pale blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his golden hair and sun-weathered face. A striking combination that was impossible to ignore. He released a dry chuckle. Ha! Ha! I'm not entirely certain. Words failed him. He slowly surveyed the chaos that had just silenced the entire battlefield. The young man responsible had grown up in the borderlands of his own kingdom. How was he supposed to process any of this? He bowed even deeper to Northern and spoke with measured precision. First, sir, I must thank you for your tremendous aid today. Your presence changed everything. I hardly know what to say or how to express the depth of my gratitude. Honestly, I'm not even sure these are the right words, because my thoughts feel scrambled and I'm still struggling, with little success, to make sense of what just unfolded. He paused, trembling. Now he was the one gripping the young man's hand. You arrived and defeated someone even the great prominent leg couldn't handle in under a minute. You slaughtered all 4 monsters that claimed hundreds of our soldiers' lives in even less time? How is such power possible? I had no idea another paragon walked among you. and one raised in Verulania's outskirts, no less? So Verulania has finally birthed a paragon? But wait, how can you be a paragon at such a young age? Northern continued watching the prince with growing concern. The young man looked as though his sanity was unraveling. I think... Oh wait, what do you need? How can we reward you for this kindness? Northern smiled slightly and shook his head. Any reward will have to wait. The war is far from over. His expression slowly hardened, causing the prince to straighten. The nations. I'm certain they've remained indifferent to this entire war. I don't know their reasons, but it was a foolish move. They underestimated Dante, and they're going to pay dearly for that mistake. This was merely the opening strike. He studied the prince intently before stepping back. Right now, I must focus on saving my school. You try to save what remains of your nation. Northern's clone approached him, clutching several soul cores with a battered and bloodied man slung over its shoulders. A small rift shimmered and tore through space itself. The prince and the people scattered around staggered backward but froze mid-step as they watched the clone enter the rift with the military man. Northern waved dismissively. Don't worry about that. The rift vanished completely. Northern rose slowly into the air. The prince stared up at him, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. He looked as though he didn't want Northern to leave. Wanted to learn more about this enigmatic young man. Wanted answers to the questions burning in his mind. Yet understanding flickered in his gaze. The weight of his own responsibilities reflected in the depths of his eyes. He seems like a good man, Northern murmured to himself before flying toward the estate. The arena marked the estate's heart. Frozen, still, standing like a monument that whispered stories of sacrifice and courage. Most students had received treatment and now sat gathered around the First Estate building. Though they could have entered their usual resting place, the instructors had ordered them to remain outside. Preparations were underway for an immediate return to the academy. Instructors and Citadel representatives, along with notable clan representatives who had helped secure the students' safety, moved busily throughout the grounds. The students sensed something was deeply wrong, but none understood exactly what was unfolding. They suspected the city was under attack, but this felt like something far worse. Nissa sat leaning against one of the columns that framed the building's entrance. Beside her, the vice president had also taken a seat. Behind her, leaning against the same column, his stomach and head were bandaged, his face pale yet radiating more life than anyone would expect from someone who'd been stabbed mere hours ago. Still, a despondent expression clouded his features. Nissa's face appeared deadpan but carried a somber weight. Shay clenched his teeth inwardly, hiding the action behind closed lips. He looked down slightly. I heard he died trying to protect us. Nissa remained silent for a long moment. Then her voice emerged, tender and fragile, demanding gentle care. There's no way to know for certain. No one has checked the Colosseum. He could be frozen, maybe by his own talent ability. Her voice carried a broken quality that made Shay's eyes widen slightly as he looked at her. She frowned and met his stare. What? He shook his head and quickly looked away. Nothing. A melancholy smile ghosted across his face barely a second later as he turned his gaze toward his feet. It's just that. I've never seen that expression in your eyes before. Nissa tilted her head to the right, trying to decipher Shay's words, but understanding seemed to elude her. Then something descended toward them from the sky. Chapter 974, Young Shall Grow. A tiny black speck appeared in the sky at first, but suddenly the spot began to widen with great speed, growing larger and larger. Before they knew it, the students and instructors were already watching someone flying toward them. The students slowly rose to their feet because there was only one person they all suspected could fly. Since this was the same thing they'd all been desperately wishing would appear to them right now. Seeing the flying figure sent their hopes soaring. Shay looked toward the direction of the sky. Nissa did too. She was smiling, a strange light shining in her eyes as she quickly stood up, watching the figure fly closer. Shay glanced at her, smiling softly as his eyes seemed illuminated by the radiant dance of joy in the depths of her eyes. Nissa was a flawless example of beauty to him. His heart could barely be contained within his chest as he watched her. The person finally arrived above and slowly descended. At this point, they weren't wondering anymore. Mumbles traveled across the crowd of students that stood in front of the massive estate building. Some were standing around trees, some were far behind on the lawns, some toward the building, gathered around its stairs and columns. All of them were muttering to each other and looking at the strange boy who had just landed. He had very beautiful white hair, which left them with a little confusion. But even with the difference in his appearance, it was hard not to recognize his bearing, the way he flew, his eyes and the way he looked. The instructors, clans, and citadel representatives were all gathered around him, along with a strange boy who was hugging him while they were trying to talk to him. "Stars! I knew you could never die. Why would you die?" Northern chuckled dryly, trying to struggle his way out of Ellis' tight hug. "Right? How could I?" Ellis suddenly withdrew, looking at Northern with a frown. But Helena was so convinced. She was so convinced you had died. Even after all we went through in the Dark Continent together, to be so easily convinced. It's disappointing, really. Northern glanced at the huntress, who stylishly hid her face. Then he smiled. "Helena is a hater, don't you know? She probably wishes me dead." Helena wanted to speak, but Northern shoved Ellis' face away from him, causing a distraction. One gray-haired instructor had gotten closer and was already speaking. "How? Student Rian, I thought you died in there." Northern looked at the aged-faced man and smiled softly. "I did, but those were merely my clones. I've been in Fugal the whole time." The instructor's eyes slowly widened. "You've been—" The golden-haired boy with a yellow creature with long hair lying slouched on his head spoke with a tender frown knitting his brows. "How does that even make sense? You have a clone? But you also have a fire talent and an ice talent and you can fly? Can someone please make it make sense? Because suddenly, I'm not sure if this guy operates on the same talent laws and concepts as we all do." Northern glanced at the boy with a smile, his eyes widening with sparkles. Finally, someone gets it. At that point, Vector was not happy he got it. His face just froze, spiraling further down the path of intense and terrifying confusion. It was hard, in fact impossible, to imagine such a thing happening, which was why he had made such a bold statement. Because it was supposed to be impossible. At the same time, Northern was looking at him with eyes that said, "Oh, beautiful stars! You're so brilliant!" That very fact made it difficult to digest, because how was he supposed to start understanding something that he had never thought of and just couldn't fit into his head? He would need more information to understand this mess. And it wasn't just him. Others gathered around were all muttering with different expressions of awe and disbelief. The instructors especially kept mumbling among each other. At that moment, he felt so much like the center of attention and wished he could sink into the ground. He was reminded once again of the reason why he wouldn't want to be a hero whose image stands as the beacon of humanity. Northern exhaled and was about to speak when a tender, musical voice sounded. "Silence, everyone." Northern's eyes widened slightly as he saw who had come. It was Celis Vorn from the Cavelin Citadel, which was the strongest citadel in the Central Plains, with their citadel master being one of the true strongest 5 paragons that existed in the Central Plains. Northern smiled a little as he saw her. She was looking much better. The terrible injury she had received seemed to have been properly taken care of by healers. Although her eyes looked slightly dull, there was still some life in them. Her voice continued. "Let the poor boy have his breath. Right now, we should be focused on the evacuation." The instructors nodded among themselves, all agreeing in unison. One of them, a sharp-looking man with brown ruffled hair that fell above his brows, stepped out and said in a clear and audible tone, "Right now, going anywhere beyond the estate is dangerous. The city is under immense attack. Our options are very limited." The man paused to look at Northern, who had interrupted him. "Pardon." Northern spoke again. The city was under attack. I ended it when I came around. But at the same time, I don't think evacuation would be possible through conventional means. The airport was attacked and the ships were all stolen by strange hijackers. Now that I think about it, they have really been preparing for this. He sighed and shook his head before continuing. Anyways, right now the academy could be under attack. Is it really a great decision to have the students go back? The students' faces slowly hardened. They all stood, stepping forward slightly to listen more to the conversation. Northern glanced at all of them with caution before continuing. I'm just saying, the terrorists were at least kind enough to make plans to keep the students off the academy. You guys won't have to die while trying to protect what is yours. There are still very notable instructors in the academy. I know of instructor Annette. She cannot be defeated easily, that I know. Of course, her alone is not enough to stop an invasion of that magnitude. I'm sure a lot of the school's instructors also stayed back, so the academy will be safe. Why don't we consider another means of safety? I, at least, and some other instructors will go to the academy and serve as backup, and the rest of the students find safety. The crowd of students slowly parted, and Nissa, Shay and a few other faces that Northern recognized surfaced. Northern frowned subtly as they approached. They better not. Shay stood beside Nissa, his gaze rigid with determination. This should not even be a question. He paused, looked at Northern and the instructors. If you ask every student here, they are probably burning with an intense desire to save our school. His frown deepened, the light in his eyes resonating somewhat with that in every other member of the student council that gathered around. Milgard is a home to us all. Who sits around, looking for safety while watching their home burn? Shay went silent for a moment, staring deep into Northern's eyes. Then he looked at the instructors and everyone standing with unwavering confidence. It's not a question that we need to prioritize the safety of the students. That is why the student council will be going along with the instructors. This is not even up for argument. Northern stared at the council vice president, and at Nissa herself, then at the rest of them. He could even see the boy who had sustained a severe injury from him standing upright and perfectly healed. Maybe he wasn't perfectly healed, but he at least looked the part. The instructors showed a little hesitation, but they did not say anything. Northern could perceive the subtle weight of the student council's influence like a canopy. Finally, Celis spoke, her voice stern and almost intimidating. I'm pretty sure you kids have no idea what you are all asking for. We don't know what is going on. But so much has been put into the preparation of such large-scale destruction. It's stupid guts and reckless, irritating pride to think that your presence will matter on such a scale of battle. I recommend you all find your way back to your parents' homes and stay safe. Let the adults take care of this. Northern glanced at Celis. The young lady spoke so much sense it suddenly felt like she was more beautiful. Which she definitely wasn't. Northern was silent for a few seconds, then he sighed. All right, this is what will happen. Chapter 975, The Tower Airship. Everyone fell silent the moment Northern began to speak. If the student council wants to go to the academy to save their school, let them. But they need to understand that staying alive is their responsibility alone. It would be quite a shame if, after going there to save your school, you're the one who needs saving. I won't lift a finger if anyone gets killed. Trust me, I've watched many die without flinching, and I've taken lives out of pure necessity. I'm not going to feel compelled to save anyone. He paused, his gaze sweeping over them, cold and distant as winter stone. So I'll sound this warning one last time. Do you have to go? My subordinates are on their way here. Things have cleared up, so it's safe. You can start finding your way home from here. If you choose death, however, be my guest. Silence stretched between them. Some students behind the group took shameful steps backward, trying to blend into the crowd behind. But several notable student council members still stood their ground. Shay, Nasira, Ayurimyo, Tristein, whom Northern had severely injured. A purple-haired girl remained too, along with the red-haired boy, Len, and even Tever, the former disciplinary committee leader. The new committee leader, Aster, stood behind them all, watching Northern with careful eyes that seemed distant for some reason. Northern's gaze swept over them once more. He noticed the black-haired girl with big round glasses turning her face away, her cheeks flushed red. Vector's voice cut through the tension. But how exactly do we plan to go? All the airships have been stolen. Getting to another port will probably take at least a day. I don't think the Academy's fall can wait another day. Celis frowned and crossed her arms. If I call in a favor with my headmaster, we should be able to arrange something. I'm just not sure how long it will take. The instructors clenched their fists, each falling silent as they pondered the way forward. Northern sighed. His sigh was soft, but the silence hung so heavy that it echoed like thunder. He didn't seem to care. I have a way for us to reach the Academy. Every eye was already on him. Celis hesitated for a brief moment. Student. What way would that be? Northern looked at her directly. It's easier to just show you. Give me a minute. In the blink of an eye he vanished. Everyone froze, their heads turning left and right, searching for the white-haired student. No one caught even a glimpse of him. The students began muttering among themselves. Don't tell me he just ran away? This is weird. What are we supposed to do? Forget the Academy. We're all going to die. The instructors couldn't do anything to calm the students. Truth was, even they were panicking just as much. They were simply mature enough not to show it. When the very instructors who should be the steady adults are shaking inside, what could they expect from the students? In that moment, however, the air shifted. An electric charge crackled through the atmosphere. The entire place began to shimmer, the same tremor that comes before a rift tears open. Celis and several others tensed, fists clenched tight. But the feeling didn't last long. A pillar of light erupted and shot into the sky, spreading outward as if rewriting the very fabric of space. As it cleared, a brick structure revealed itself. A monumental tower whose single spire stretched endlessly toward the heavens. A moment later, the tower began to rise. Strangely, it didn't tear the ground with it or leave destruction behind. Slowly, it shifted and changed, the bricked body rearranging itself as it floated skyward. Before their eyes, the shape of an airship formed mid-air, crowned by that soaring spire. Strange, shimmering rings of runes appeared on both sides of the ship's bow. Then a staircase of bricks slowly unfolded all the way to the ground, the stairs themselves floating like spells. Everyone stared and muttered under their breath. Different expressions crossed their faces, but most shared the same unspoken question written in their eyes. Who is this person? They hesitated briefly before slowly climbing the floating stairs. The student council went first, then the instructors followed. Celis was about to climb when she looked at the other representatives. You don't have to go if you can't afford to. Kike, the swordsman, rested his hand on his sword's hilt and nodded. I hate to leave in a situation like this, but with what's happening in the Central Plains, my citadel will need me. Rushing to save the Academy would be reckless. Same here. Ivara looked at Celis with a subtle smile gracing her enchanting face. Not all our citadels have an ocean of strong people to spare. Celis chuckled and nodded before shifting her gaze to Vector. The young boy looked left and right before his eyes widened. Me? Oh, I'm going. Can't miss the fun of watching that guy fight. The other two chuckled and shook their heads. Celis smiled too. She turned to the two of them. Goodbye. I hope we meet again. They nodded at her and watched as she climbed the stairs along with Vector, who playfully hopped from one step to the next. Northern stood at the ship's bow, where the helm was positioned. The control mechanism had been restructured along with the entire tower, though the main control room remained in the tower's first chamber. After everyone had boarded, the stairs began folding back, merging seamlessly into the brick wall at the ship's base. Northern faced forward, then spoke with his hoarse voice, each word clear and sharp. Next destination, Milgard Academy. He grinned internally before gripping the helm. Damn it! I've always wanted to do that. The massive tower moving through the air made the entire area feel heavy. A few instructors remained below with the students, all of them staring up at the ship's enormous shadow as it swallowed them whole. Despite the night, its presence darkened everything further. The sheer scale of it left their mouths hanging open. The ship's base was as large as the estate mansion they'd been staying in, not to mention the tower rising from it. One moment, the ship stirred slowly in the air. The next, it vanished in a flash of silver light. Chapter 976. The Vestige of the Chaos Prince. From a vast sea of clouds rose a jagged mountain peak. The mountain was shaped strangely, not like regular mountains at all. It was round and jagged, with a sea of crimson cloud swirling at its center. At the far end of this roundness sat the mountain's peak, where the great alloy walls of the academy stood. Opposite the academy, before one crossed the crimson sea of cloud, a group of people waited. Above them, 7 different airships floated like silent sentinels. At their front stood a man with a scar slashed across one closed eye. He stared down at the crimson depths, his military coat snapping and beating violently as the wind picked up pace. Behind him, several others stood at attention, dressed just like him. Their black military coats whipped against the growing wind. A heavy silence wrapped around them like a shroud, thick with tension. Their gazes were trained and razor-sharp. One of them, black spiky hair fighting against his military cap, broke the quiet. "Lieutenant, what are we waiting for?" The man in front, Lieutenant Dante, clicked his tongue in irritation. "Azit, do you know what lies in these depths?" Azit glanced at the crimson clouds as they rolled gently into each other, like blood mixing with blood.
No.
"And it feels terrifying just to look at." Lieutenant Dante's smile was grim. "Beneath these clouds lies the prison that holds what remains of a fallen, forbidden creature, a being that should never have drawn breath." Azit frowned, starting to look at the clouds again but thinking better of it. He turned to Dante instead. "He must have been truly unacceptable. Even his remains feel foreboding." Lieutenant Dante's smile softened slightly. Of course he was. Being half Origin, half Tyrant, to the Origins he was tainted by Tyrant essence, so they cast him out. To the Tyrants he carried Origin blood, so they rejected him too. This made him a very lonely traveler. Silence stretched between them. Then another voice cut through, raspy, hasty, far less melodious than Azit's. "That must have been sad for him. But how does this story help us unleash the Leviathan in these depths against the Academy?" Dante shifted his gaze sideways but didn't look back before returning his attention to the Crimson Sea. Then he said, "Aston, you are impatient and rude. If you didn't make up for that rotten character with proper use of your strength." Aston's rough face twisted. He ground his teeth and lowered his head slightly. "I apologize." Dante's response was ice-cold. "Your apology means nothing to me." He kept staring into the sea of crimson cloud. For a long while he just stared. Then he touched his scarred eye and slowly opened it, mumbling, "Not everyone is born with eyes that can see through reality's fabric. To dare tear it away as a child was pure foolishness. Children of Trael, if only they knew what was coming, they would get their act together." Then Dante stared down into the sea. The moment he did, his eye peeled through the cloud's reality like tearing paper. Dante could now see something far more grotesque layered deep within the sea. It was like a flowing red tide made of thousands of eyes. The mass kept moving and swirling, crashing against the invisible barrier that held it back from the clouds, but finding no way through. Dante exhaled slowly. Truly amazing how stubborn that boy could be. A small boy who became a force that couldn't be defeated. He pressed his palms together and began muttering in a language very different from the common tongue of Trael. The words twisted around his mouth like serpents, but he spoke them without trouble. A blue circle covered in runic patterns appeared above the sea of clouds. It rose higher and higher until it suddenly cracked and shattered into nothing. Dante faltered slightly, blood trailing down from his scarred eye. His brows knitted in anger as he pressed his palms together again and began muttering once more. This time, 2 circles appeared instantly, rising toward the sky. 3 more followed, slowly climbing after them. The sea of clouds suddenly grew wild. What had been gentle swirling became a raging storm, thrashing violently and trying to tear itself apart. Dante trembled as more blood ran from his nose. But his hands stayed locked in position. Even though pressure crashed against him like waves, he did not stop. Finally, the sea of clouds began to rise. It climbed slowly toward the mountain's edge and started spilling over, rolling down the sides like a crimson waterfall. The soldiers near him almost staggered back, but Dante's voice cut through their fear. The clouds are not what you should worry about. Their gazes snapped to the mountain's depths. Something was being revealed as the clouds poured away, mixing with the white mist that the mountain itself breathed out. What they saw made them all stumble backward, bodies shaking and eyes wide with terror. What in hell are those eyes, Lieutenant? Any strong drifter could sense how wrong and unnatural those eyes were. The way they drifted and stared back felt like staring into an abyss, one that stared right back. Not that any of them would know that old saying. The flowing tide of eyes slowly began to rise. The clouds, white just moments before, were now painted red, as if they had been stabbed and left to bleed out. Strangely, some of the clouds were slowly climbing up the Academy's walls, moving with grim purpose. Some of the majors behind Dante stared with barely hidden terror. One of them asked, "Lieutenant, what will that cloud do if it reaches the Academy's top?" He paused, looking at the rest of the clouds that had instantly turned red. "No, what are all these clouds for? Aren't they supposed to be some kind of prison? Why do they feel so threatening? Lieutenant Dante, or should we drop the act and call him Call?" Looked around with cold indifference. "Those? Well, the prisoner conquered the prison long ago. It was just waiting for its lock to break. Now, the prison itself moves by the prisoner's will." Call's gaze swept the scene. Not just the clouds. The Chaos Prince's remains conquered this entire island long ago, the very ground the Academy sits on. So the Academy's fall was always inevitable. Chapter 977. The fall of the Academy was always inevitable. The fall of the Academy was always inevitable. Annette scurried through a sea of scattered books, dark circles shadowing her eyes, as she tried to piece together information that echoed endlessly in her mind. Too many fragments crashed together in her thoughts. She struggled to either connect them or pull them apart. Her hair hung in tangled strands, but she couldn't spare a moment to care. Her apprentice fared worse. Vida lay buried beneath towers of books while papers littered every surface of the office. With most instructors absent, this was their chance. They could finally push their investigation deeper into dangerous territory. As a master, Annette had always held the privilege to come and teach at the Academy. But something felt wrong about this place. It started when she lost someone far more than a friend, to the Academy's harsh curriculum while Roughsborough still held the president's seat. People die due to causes all the time. People consumed by vengeance happen just as often. But Annette wasn't driven by revenge. Felix had never regretted his choices, even when evidence surfaced that he might have been used. He remained at peace because Roughsborough had honored his end of their bargain. Yet Felix always said one thing. The fall of the Academy was always inevitable. That phrase had sparked countless debates between them. Felix believed that Milwa had built the Academy on that island knowing it was doomed to collapse one day, and would drag thousands of students down with it. All for the power he craved. Nothing backed up this wild claim. It was just Felix's gut feeling run wild, or maybe not, but he never showed proof to his statements. So even though Annette trusted his instincts enough to bet her life on them, she wasn't foolish enough to chase such a dangerous truth. Until the Dark Continent incident changed everything. That disaster drove her to the Academy. What had Felix seen? What had Milwa done? And what were the real consequences? Did it begin with the Academy's fall and the death of its students, or end with them? These unanswered questions gnawed at her sanity. Every day she spent on Academy grounds felt like slow torture, and Vida bore the brunt of her obsession. She barely slept 4 hours each night, lost in endless research through ancient texts. Their hunt for crucial knowledge had already uncovered shocking discoveries, including the very reason Professor Heimberger remained alive despite being human. Of course, they could only access such forbidden information during this 1 week of the Milwa Festival, when security relaxed enough for them to break into the underground library. Annette staggered backward and collapsed, papers scattering across her like fallen leaves. She stared at the ceiling with hollow eyes, her gaze growing distant. A moment later, she released a heavy sigh. Vida emerged from her paper tomb, hands first, then pulled herself free. She watched her master for several heartbeats before speaking in a soft, careful voice. "What do we do?" Annette sat up and buried her face in her hands. "This place deserves to fall, don't you think?" Vida hesitated, then nodded slowly. "When we consider Milwa's crimes, his legacy should crumble. But the backlash would crush the Central Plains. If we're not careful, the Academy's weakening foundations could damage the prison holding the creature in the sea of clouds. If that happens—" She paused. "Even in the Age of Heroes no one could kill it, not even the Ream Guard of that time. We don't have a single luminary now. We'll all die." Annette sat in silence, then her eyes lit up. "Maybe we won't. Northern's still out there, growing stronger every day. There's Raven too. We can rebuild the Dark Continent team. We made the impossible happen once. We can do it again." Vida's expression grew troubled. "Raven." She shook her head. "Something about her disturbs me. The weight she places on her goals feels too heavy, too cruel, to herself and others. Are you sure depending on her won't cause more harm than good?" She watched Annette consider her words before continuing. "And Northern. Yes, he's strong, but he's still just a master or savant. Even as a sage, what difference would it make? Unless he's 10 sages rolled into one, I don't see him defeating something that survived the Age of Heroes and existed long before. This thing is nearly 500 years old. And that's just its vestige." Vida spoke sense, and Annette wanted to agree. If she didn't know Northern personally, she would have. She'd watched him from the moment he awakened as a drifter. Nothing about that boy was normal. She wouldn't be surprised if he truly was 10 sages in one body. The problem was, even 10 sages might not be enough. She believed Vida's logic, but in her own way. Northern was undoubtedly powerful. But was he strong enough to defeat a creature that had lived for 500 years? Trapped for over 300? She shook her head. "I don't know." Silence stretched between them until rage flared within her. "Stars. Those selfish, greedy bastards. All for power, they leave us with consequences this destructive. And Ruffsborough shamelessly walks the same path." Annette slammed her fist on the book before her, leaving the surface with a charred mark. A terrifying tremor shook the office floor. Annette frowned and pressed her palm to the ground. The tremor returned, softer but unmistakable. Both ladies shot to their feet, tension crackling between them. Annette turned toward the window, her voice barely a whisper. "What's happening?" In the distance, beyond the academy walls, crimson clouds rolled like spilled blood. They climbed the high stone barriers and poured over the edge, reaching downward with hungry fingers. The mist moved like a living thing, scarlet vapor that had tasted blood and hungered for more. It flowed over the walls and began its slow descent into the academy grounds. Annette's eyes widened as she watched, her pupils trembling with fear. Vida crept closer, staring at the strange fog as it crawled down the wall like a predator stalking prey. A terrible realization crept into her mind, and her voice emerged as barely more than breath. "Sage and, isn't that the Crimson Cloud?" Chapter 978. Under Attack. Everyone in the academy was confused. They watched as the crimson mist slowly fell down, unable to do anything to it. For some reason, the soldiers at the gate along with the communication devices that connected the gate to the mainstream system of the academy were also unreachable. Something was definitely wrong. A man with a silver hair packed into a ponytail behind, and a full gray beard stared at the wall with a dark expression on his face, his black eyes darkening like veils of clouds gathering for a heavy downpour. He wore a simple, suit-like attire with a white, high-necked cloak fluttering behind his back. 2 more instructors came to his side and bowed. "Head instructor, we have confirmed that no one is currently at the wall." The head instructor frowned. "What? Why?" The other one of the instructors responded. His tone was sharp and witty. The last feed was that of a scream. We think they might have been attacked. Attacked? By what? The head instructor turned to the red mist as it was nearing the ground now. Annette landed behind him, causing the ground to crack. She stood up, donning a cross-necked garb that also fluttered in the subtle wind. Head instructor, what is going on? The man glanced at Annette. His dark expression did not change any bit, almost as if he did not care if she was here or not. But he responded. We have lost communication with the wall. And then there's this strange creeping mist that is drawing nearer to us. Annette stared at the mist for a few seconds, silent. Then she spoke. Head instructor, am I permitted to speak freely? The man looked at Annette with a grimace but responded evenly nonetheless. You can speak, Lady Annette, you're a librarian. Annette looked at the mist. It was closer to the ground now and more were even spilling over. It seemed like the entire sky was getting consumed by the strange mist. And the wall itself. No signs of the alloy wall of the academy itself could be seen. Everything was consumed by the crimson mist. I think the sea of crimson clouds is spilling over. The head instructor's eyes widened at once. What? He stared at Annette, eyes widened and trembling. Then he shifted to the wall. His voice shook. That is not even possible. Do you have any idea what you're saying? Annette looked at him with a resolute light in her eyes. Oh, I do, head instructor. And I know you do too. You've been the head instructor in this school for close to 40 years. There's no way you don't know that Milwa was built on the corpse of a monster. The instructor's expression darkened into a grimace, shooting fires at Annette. You! How dare you make such statements? Do you know the implications of what you speak? Annette frowned at the man. You either be obsessed with keeping those dirty secrets or finding a way to save the school. To find a way to deal with whatever this is, we must first understand what it is we are dealing with. Keeping secrets is useless now. The head instructor's eyes was still widened. He shook his head with a very foreboding darkness shadowing his face. You don't know what you are asking for. This is not the sea of crimson clouds. I'm sure this is something else. I will not tell into your reckless trap. Annette slapped her face in frustration and disappointment. She was silent for a second only to face him and yell with a terrifying voice. The academy is going fall for fuck's sake. The academy is going to fall. The man did not look at her. Instead he stared at the crimson clouds that were now misting on the ground, consuming the greenery lawns of the academy forefront. Everything was immediately dyed red as it passed, forever dyed by the cloud. The instructors were sparsely positioned in the front of the academy, each of them with a slightly horrified expression on their faces. It wasn't only Annette that was thinking the way she was. Every other person also was, but their suspicion was groundless. Annette, though, had a clear understanding of what she was saying and knew that definitely the head instructor, the principal, Heimberger, and many other high instructors would definitely know about it. That they were playing dumb even at a time like this was just extremely annoying. While she was waiting for a response from the head instructor, suddenly, something wailed from inside the mist, and without a waste of second, it flew outside, pouncing on one of the instructors. All the others activated their talents, wanting to shoot at the creature, but it had vanished before they could register it in their line of sight. All of a sudden another instructor cried out with a guttural wail. He was pushed to the ground, and in one swift movement, his head was yanked off, causing blood to splash all over the concrete ground. The crimson mist thickened. Screams shattered the tense silence as a second instructor dropped, his head torn clean from his shoulders, rolling into the spreading red haze. The others didn't wait. Engage! The head instructor barked, his voice like thunder, pulling the scattered instructors from their shock. Talents flared to life. A wall of flames erupted from the fingertips of one of the instructors, arcing into the mist like a barrier. But the fog didn't burn. It moved through the fire, snuffing it out with an eerie hiss, and surged forward in tendrils. Form up! A spearman shouted, stabbing forward as another shadow burst from the mist. He struck true, his spear piercing something with flesh, but the creature seemed to giggle. A wheezing, hollow cackle that sounded too close to human and far too wrong. Then came the retaliation. A crimson limb, jagged and hooked at the end, shot forward and tore through his armor like it was parchment, dragging him bodily into the fog. A crunch followed. Then silence. Chapter 979. The Fall of the Academy, Part 1. The monsters tore into the instructors, their claws ripping through flesh as they dragged the broken bodies into the crimson fog. More beasts emerged from the mist, muscles like steel cables, tendons stretched taut as bowstrings, eyes burning with bloodlust. Annette pressed her back against the main entrance, beneath the stone archway that led to the inner compound. The instructors stood closer to the outer walls, closer to death. Still, they fought. One instructor lunged forward, lightning crackling between his fingers. The bolt struck true, felling the monster that leaped at him. But two more pounced with terrible speed, their claws working in perfect sync to tear his arms from his shoulders before he could blink. The fallen monster rose again, jaws snapping shut around the instructor's head in one fluid motion. It dragged him backward into the red mist, leaving only a crimson trail. Two fresh beasts burst from the fog, racing toward their next prey. Annette's teeth ground together. She understood now. Her gaze found the head instructor, whose barked orders had drawn him several steps forward. With a single leap, she closed the distance and fixed him with a burning stare. This academy will fall, and I will not forget that you helped orchestrate its destruction. The head instructor's face twisted, but before he could speak, Annette soared upward in a tornado of fire. She rolled forward, sending violent winds that scattered both monsters and instructors alike. Something moved beneath the flames. Fast. A silver flash that vanished as quickly as it appeared. A bone-crushing sound split the air, and the ground shuddered beneath their feet. The nearest crimson monster exploded in a spray of flesh and blood, its steel-like tendons snapping like broken guitar strings. Vita cracked her knuckles and rolled her neck, deep shadows still carved beneath her eyes. She looked like she needed 16 hours of sleep, which made what she'd just done seem impossible. TCH. I hate this. Wish I could just sleep for like 16 hours before needing to fight. The academy track pants hit her powerful thighs, but even her loose shirt couldn't disguise the curves that seemed to flow in perfect harmony with her strength. This body that granted her such power was the same one that had cost her everything. Her clan name, her acceptance, branded as an imperfect creation. Annette glanced at her and grinned like a wolf. The tornado of fire expanded, consuming everything in its path. When the flames cleared, the monsters lay charred and still. The ground that had crawled with beasts moments before was now silent and empty. Every crimson monster was dead, and the surviving instructors stood with their mouths hanging open, blinking in disbelief at what they had witnessed. Annette's feet touched down, and she walked slowly toward the mist, her voice cutting through the silence as she addressed the instructors. All of you, pull back. The instructors looked at her with newfound respect and quickly began their retreat, leaving her and her apprentice alone in the outer compound with the lingering crimson fog. Annette stopped before the mist and slipped her hands into her pockets, studying it with a dark frown. What are you going to do now? Every creature you throw at me will be destroyed, until you have nothing left to send. The mist offered no response. Instead, it began to swirl. Then larger, more twisted monsters burst forth in trails of crimson light. But they weren't fast enough to catch a sage like Annette off guard. A wall of fire erupted and slammed into the first beast, hurling it backward. Vita met the second with another crushing blow. But this time the monster didn't explode. Its thick muscles rippled as it was thrown back, rolling across the ground before coming to rest near the mist. The creature sprang to its feet and charged again. Vita drew back for another punch. But as it flew forward, the beast suddenly dropped low and lunged with razor-sharp fangs. She sidestepped just in time. The monster only tore away a strip of fabric from her side and left a shallow scratch across her skin. The beast whirled around, fixing her with menacing eyes that seemed to savor the taste of her blood. But before it could lunge, its partner crashed into it with a torrent of fire. Both monsters rolled and tumbled away from each other. Annette sent another wave of flames rolling forward like burning wheels. They slammed into the beasts, consumed them, and exploded skyward. The fire burned intensely before slowly dying down. The monsters tried to move, but they were badly burned, their bodies blackened like charcoal. Annette looked at Vita with a stern expression. "Finish them." Vita hesitated. Annette caught it instantly and shouted, "Do you think those things are human? Kill them, Vita!" She gritted her teeth and surged forward. As she moved, sparks of light danced around her fist, forming a sleek gauntlet with razor-sharp knuckles. She raised her hand and buried it into the monster with explosive force. A shockwave rippled outward. The creature convulsed once, then went still. She moved to the next beast and crushed its head before standing up. Annette was already facing the mist, ready for whatever came next, until her expression changed, because there was a sound. Something groaned like an ancient beast about to die. "Huh?" She stared at the walls, frowning as she listened carefully. Then she heard it again, a gentle, low creaking, as if the metal wall was being torn apart from within. Her eyes widened as she realized what was happening. The wall. It's tearing. The seemingly unbreakable academy wall groaned again, this time louder and more painful. Everyone heard it just as clearly as Annette had. They all stared at the wall, horror draining the color from their faces. The mist remained silent, waiting for them to break under the terror of what was coming. The wall groaned heavily again. A thin crack suddenly appeared on the surface. Whatever was trying to break through had to be massive, fast, airborne, and incredibly strong. Such a creature should be impossible. Though nothing was truly impossible in this world of drifters and rifts and monsters, there were rules, subtle laws that governed each monster's form and power. This was why the wall should never break. But none of that seemed to matter now. Everyone below stood frozen. Fear gripped their hearts so tightly that no one could move. Even Annette could only watch as the walls groaned in pain, about to be shattered by something that filled her with true dread. The next sound that echoed through the air. The entire wall trembled, then exploded. The metal splintered like glass under divine wrath, bursting outward in molten fragments. Each piece sang through the air like death bells, crashing into towers, embedding in pillars, piercing the ground with thunderous force. One chunk of metal tumbled through the air and slammed into the archway leading to the inner compound, causing it to crumble under its crushing weight. Another crashed into the row of cherry trees, destroying their beauty and sending them toppling into each other. A massive piece flew deep into the inner compound, rolling and tearing up the concrete before smashing into the grand fountain at the academy's heart. It settled in the water with a splash. Water spilled everywhere, and the statue of a man holding a book collapsed over the stone. Silence fell, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet that came before something final. The air trembled, not from heat, not from power, but from presence. Annette's lips parted, her breath catching. She'd faced monsters born from rifts, seen warped horrors and unspeakable mutations. But this was something else. The wall groaned once more, and then the creature slowly stepped through. A limb, that was the only word for it, emerged first. Thick as a building's support beam, covered in plates of black armor laced with glowing crimson veins. Each step left scorched prints behind, as if the very ground recoiled from its touch. Then came the head, long and twisted like a dragon's skull, crowned with jagged horns that pulsed with bloody light. A single slit of an eye opened. Just one. It looked down at them all, and smiled. Vita's fists clenched, but her knees shook. What the hell is that? Chapter 980. The Fall of the Academy, Part 2. The creature thrust through the hole in the door, its massive twisting horn ripping through the wall's alloys like paper. The sheer weight of its body pushed forward, metal screaming against bone and scale. The wall shuddered, concrete cracking under the assault. With one brutal swipe of its limb, the monster tore through what remained, metal shrieking as it split apart under terrible force. Crimson scales caught the pale moonlight, each one gleaming like fresh blood, as the beast carved its way through the academy's reinforced wall. Its foreleg crashed through, striking the ground with a thunderous impact. Concrete exploded outward, sending fragments spinning through the air like deadly rain. Mist pooled at its feet, swirling in lazy spirals. The creature's hind leg followed, smashing through the last of the wall. The entire island groaned beneath the weight, trembling as if the earth itself recoiled from this abomination. The beast pulled its full body through the breach, revealing itself in all its horror. A cathedral of flesh and nightmare stood before them, towering like some cursed mountain dragged up from the depths of hell. Its hide rippled with scales and muscle, ridged with thorns that pulsed like living veins. Crimson tendrils, thick as ancient trees, lashed from its back, whipping at the sky as if settling some ancient grudge. The twisted face was a maze of bone and horn, for massive spikes stretched backward while two others curled toward its gaping maw, framing rows of unforgiving teeth. It raised its serpentine neck, scales pulsing with crimson energy, then lowered its massive head. Crimson eyes blazed like dying stars, ancient and merciless. As it stared down at them, the world changed. The air thickened, each breath a struggle. Instructors collapsed to their knees, clutching their chests as they gasped for air. The wind itself turned crimson, heavy with dread as it drifted through the darkness. Everything, air, atmosphere, the very stones beneath their feet, pulsed with the vile presence of the thing watching them. Annette tried to move, but invisible weight crushed down on her shoulders. It felt like the creature's massive limb pressed against her, though the beast hadn't stirred. It simply stood there, studying them all. Then, between its scales, eyes opened, and began to fall. They dropped into the crimson mist below, and from that fog, nightmares emerged. Creatures with 4 legs and whipping tails, long necks and cruel horns, burst forward at blinding speed. Here one moment, gone the next. Others took to the sky on leathery wings, darkening the academy's night. Each bore a single crimson eye that rolled across their bodies, watching, always watching. The academy drowned in chaos and carnage. Outside the academy, airships plummeted into the mountain's depths, their broken hulls spinning through empty air. Bodies fell alongside twisted metal, disappearing into the darkness below. Call, still wrapped in Lieutenant Dante's stolen flesh, watched the torn academy wall with cold indifference. The majors behind him trembled, faces drained of color as they witnessed the devastation. One sweep of the creature's tentacles had shattered all 7 ships floating in the air. Then it had carved through the wall itself, metal screaming as massive limbs punched through. The academy was built from the strongest metal in the world, imported from Ironspine Mountain in Riamgard, a mountain of pure iron that had formed from the corpse of the first Leviathan to ever walk the earth. For this creature to tear through that iron wall so easily meant only one thing. It was a Leviathan too. Call knew this, of course. He had arranged for it himself, pouring resources and more than half his strength into this gambit. The effort had left him weak, forcing him to avoid direct confrontation. But they had defeated his first attempt in Lithia. Most likely Burning Storm's doing. At least the bastard exhausted himself and died for it. He kept staring at the gaping hole in the academy wall. The barrier stretched so high that even with the Leviathan inside, he could see nothing of the battle within. Only a section had been torn open. The rest of the wall still stood, though it groaned under the strain. As it swallowed hard, his voice shaking. That thing, if they can't defeat it, won't it destroy the rest of the continent? Call glanced back with a frown. And what's wrong with that? The young major's throat worked. Pardon me, Lieutenant, but aren't we trying to save the continent? Call turned to face them fully. Don't be naive. Do you think we have the resources to battle United Nations? Right now, I'm certain there's no man on trial strong enough to defeat a catastrophic Leviathan. He paused, letting the words sink in. The only way would be for all paragons to join forces. Riamgard would have to get involved too. Once they deal with it, we strike while they're exhausted and end this. In Call's mind, that moment, striking while they were broken and spent, would be the culmination of everything. The final war between those who united to save their continent and his army would snap the last threads holding peace together. Once that boundary shattered, Cryos would be free again. And this time, no one would reverse the situation. He would make sure the only person capable of stopping Cryos stayed very, very busy. The third major spoke up, his voice thick and intimidating. Definitely more mature than the other two. Is Burning Storm really dead? You actually killed him? Call stared into the gray eyes of the black-haired boy, whose dark bangs hung above thick brows. Do you doubt me? The major shook his head. I don't. I watched the dynamic between you two during my days as a constable. Burning Storm might have hurt you, but I hoped he wouldn't have to die. The man's gaze dropped to Call's waist. Also, not to question you, but where is your sword? Call's expression darkened. Not to question me? What gives you the right? Do you have a death wish? The air crackled with killing intent. The major stepped back immediately, bowing his head. I apologize. Call ground his teeth in irritation. You all seem determined to test me tonight, as if killing my only friend wasn't enough. Are you trying to make me kill you too? They all stepped back. Call's voice turned cold. You'd better behave. With the war reaching its climax, we can't afford to waste resources. Yes, sir. They bowed and fell silent. Moments later, an enormous shadow swallowed the entire island, blocking out what little moonlight remained. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.